Marvel, I went a little ahead in time by traveling. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 226, demonstrating strength. Hank's worldview had been broken. Not only could someone change the size of an object without using pi particles, but according to George's words, there were more than one person who could do it. How many people can do this? Hank asked. Hank, this world is big, and there are countless intelligent races in the universe, so don't let the Earth limit your imagination. Those who can do this directly may not be described as human beings anymore. George explained, this is an atomic control ability. When you can master this ability, through observing the world, how atoms are combined into molecules, and changing the properties of matter through atomic level transformation, it will no longer be a dream to turn one substance into another. Ordinary people may find these things obscure and difficult to understand. If you look at it from another perspective, it may be easier to understand. In the final analysis, everything in the world is composed of extremely small particles. If you can make a fuss at the atomic level and transform one substance into another, everything between heaven and earth can flow freely. People who can do this naturally can no longer be described as human beings, and it is not an exaggeration to call them gods. The realm of transforming matter at will is what George has not reached now, and it is also George's next pursuit. At least compared to the true God who can create life at will, he is still far behind. There is no need to explain these things to Hank. He just needs to see his own ability. Of course, those are of no significance to us for the time being. What I want to say is that compared to the first one, the second one is the direction of your future efforts. George said. After George finished speaking, he saw Hank looking at him with an extremely complicated look. Fear, surprise, desire. Please tell me the second method. Hank said sincerely. George did not miss the opportunity and said directly, the second method is to carefully study the relationship between pi particles. If one day you can use nanotechnology to directly change your size, then you can break free from the constraints of the battlesuit and show your strength anytime and anywhere. Nanotechnology. Hank fell into deep thought. After a while, he said again, it's a pity that the current technology is not perfect. Yes, that's why you need to improve, experiment, and advance. George encouraged. But I still want to study the quantum field more. Hank said. Of course, this is your freedom. Hank, today's chat ends here. Next, you should think about it carefully. In any case, I hope you will forget everything you saw and heard today, unless you are willing to join my company. At that time, I will complete your pursuit. George parked the sports car on the side of the road and opened the door. Hank naturally understood what George meant and said, I understand, Minister. I will think about it carefully. George did not get out of the car, but just waved his hand. A portal with golden sparks appeared next to Hank, and the other side was the underground parking lot where the two had come out before. Hank tried to walk over again in surprise, and heard George behind him say, don't be too stressed, contact me anytime you think it through. Then the portal disappeared in front of Hank's puzzled eyes. After the portal disappeared, Hank, who was standing next to his car, poked the place where the space door was originally. After seeing that there was no change in the space, Hank muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear, can't you call it a person? Hank was destined to not be able to sleep peacefully tonight, because the information he received today was too magical. In front of those magical memes, Hank immediately felt that the pi particle technology he mastered was really nothing. On the other hand, George happily returned to the island. George no longer considered everything that happened today. In this era, surveillance was not popular. Even if there were cameras, George could not be photographed. This little trick was still very simple. As for what choice Hank would make, in fact, it was destined when George showed his ability. At this moment, George has become his hope to rescue his wife as soon as possible. When he figures it out, he will naturally find George. As for the reason why George helped Hank, one, George did steal Hank's pi particle technology at that time, and because the pi particles further achieved atomic control, he did owe Hank a favor at this point. Another reason is that George has a plan, and Hank Pym and his wife Janet are among the most suitable people. Passing a note to Hank is completely a bad taste, deliberately causing trouble for Howard and Hydra. There is no way you can steal Hank's technology yourself, but if Hydra and Howard want to get it, it's not possible. George is so double standard and so bad taste. Sure enough, the next day, George received a call from Hank. At the headquarters of the group, George met Hank again, who looked not very good. "Hank, I didn't expect you to contact me so soon." George asked someone to pour Hank a cup of coffee before saying, "There is no way. What I saw yesterday was too amazing. I still don't understand what method you used in the end." Hank took a sip of coffee and continued, "So I believe what you said can help me achieve what I pursue. In other words, you agreed to join my company, right?" George said with a smile. "Yes, boss." Hank put down the coffee cup and said seriously, "Very good. I can tell you that I used a kind of teleportation magic yesterday, which is why I'm confident that I can help you find Janet." George looked at Hank with expectation and then continued, "But now there is a problem that you need to solve." "What?" Hank asked immediately. "Locate Janet's position, even if it is just a short communication," George said. The moment George said it, Hank understood the difficulty inside. It was too difficult to locate a person in quantum space. "Don't think it's so troublesome. I believe you can do it," George encouraged. Because George remembered that many years later, the daughter of the second generation Ant-Man, a teenage girl, could establish communication with a quantum world under Hank's guidance. It would cost a lot to rebuild a laboratory like the one in the previous bureau. Hank said, "Haha, Hank, do you think money will be a problem for me? Someone will arrange everything for you. All you have to do is locate the coordinates. I will bring her back in person when the time comes." George said, "I know, boss. But what I don't understand is that since you no longer need Pym particles, what do I need to pay?" Hank asked at this time. Chapter 227 Director Pierce. Hank also understood that people like George would not help him for no reason. There must be gains and losses. This is an eternal truth. Helping you save Janet is your reward. As for what you need to do, you can wait until then. Don't worry, it must be very simple for you, and if you and Janet don't want to, I can allow you to refuse," George said. In fact, whether George pointed out the direction of Pym particle technology for Hank, or recruited himself with the reward of saving Janet, Hank knew that, no matter what George asked at that time, as long as it did not hurt his family, Hank could not refuse. But no matter what Hank would think, George would not care. Because from the beginning to the end, George wanted to get nothing more than the coordinates of the quantum world. Hank has the motivation to save his wife, and he will definitely study quantum technology seriously. And with the coordinates of the Wasp, George will naturally get everything he wants. As for entering the quantum field directly, to help Hank find Janet without coordinates, that is impossible. Not to mention how big the quantum world is, even George can't guarantee that he can find someone there after entering. More importantly, no one can guarantee that they will definitely enter the quantum world by becoming smaller. The quantum world is divided into two parts. One is the quantum void and the other is the quantum space. In the outermost quantum void of the quantum world, there are not only countless energy rays, but also super time flows that are difficult to understand. Once you fall into the super time flow, you may be like the second generation Ant-Man, thinking that you have been in the quantum field for 5 hours, but in fact more than 5 years have passed outside. Therefore, it is very dangerous to blindly enter the quantum world without preparation. George remembered that Janet entered the quantum world and lived there for a long time. When Hank officially joined, George asked Jai to personally arrange someone to be responsible for the establishment of Hank's quantum laboratory. As for the cost, as George said to Hank, money has long been meaningless in his eyes, and it is just a bunch of numbers. Even telling Hank about the future direction of Pym particles was that George remembered the atom in the DC world. Then he told Hank the method used by the 4th generation atom. Whether it will succeed in the end still needs Hank to study it himself. When Hank was about to start researching the quantum world again, Hydra in S.H.I.E.L.D. did not give up the research on Pym particles. They found the couple Heir who had assisted Hank before and took out Hank's previous design plan, hoping that they could continue to study Hank's project. Under the attraction of money and the coercion of power, Heir and his wife not only agreed to continue to develop the project for S.H.I.E.L.D., but also invited another colleague, Bill Foster, to join the research. Since George had told Hank that he would deal with the internal problems of S.H.I.E.L.D., he would not break his promise. Under George's promotion, the motion for the current director of S.H.I.E.L.D. to neglect his duties, Holland's illegal operation, and suspected of stealing important laboratory information was successfully passed. With all the evidence complete, even Hydra could not let Mitchell continue to serve as the director of the Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency, and Holland was directly thrown into prison. After the recommendation, Alexander Pierce succeeded Mitchell as the new director of the Strategic Homeland Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency as expected. Next, the research project of pi particles was cancelled, but the research in the quantum field continued. Howard was given a warning because he only participated in the research of pi particles, which was not a big deal for Howard. It just so happened that Howard could focus all his energy on the Pegasus project. In George's office at the Triskelion headquarters in Washington, Pierce, congratulations. George handed back the signed appointment letter. Thank you, Minister. Pierce said with a smile. I didn't do anything. It's your own credit that I can become the director of the Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency. George shook his head and said, George will not take the blame for appointing Pierce as the new director. Otherwise, when Pierce himself is exposed, he will be labeled as a person who doesn't know people well. Moreover, George saw a recent report from the Hydra in the United States 2 days ago. In order to get this position, Pierce did not do much to other Hydra members, and also tried his best to win over a group of members within S.H.I.E.L.D. to support him in becoming the director. However, George would not intervene in this kind of struggle, which he considered to be a minor one. Moreover, both sides were Hydra, so it didn't matter how they fought. Pierce ascended to the throne of the director of the Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Agency, which also meant that he had become the leader of this branch of the new Hydra in the United States. This new Hydra was naturally aimed at the Merrill family, which had already established a foothold in the United States. That family was still pursuing that illusory dream, so there was only a relationship of interest between the two Hydras, and they were not of the same kind. I have learned a lot from being your assistant for these years, so thank you very much. Pierce still thanked him. Those are all imaginary, Pierce. There are some things I hope you can remember. George looked at the respectful Pierce and said, yes, you said, I will definitely remember it in my heart. Pierce bent his waist even lower. This world is huge, with all kinds of organizations and ambitious people. There are many who want to rule the world. I know a lot of such people or organizations. For example, George paused, and after seeing Pierce lower his head even lower, he continued, an organization like Hydra. Pierce trembled, then raised his head, showing a puzzled expression and said, hasn't the Hydra organization been completely wiped out? Haha, who knows, don't they claim that if you cut off one head, 2 heads will grow? But it doesn't matter whether it exists or not, as long as the society is stable. We are not interested in who sits in that position. George glanced at Pierce, and then continued, remember, no one likes a chaotic social environment, and no one likes to cooperate with a madman. Yes, I will definitely keep in mind the minister's instructions and crack down on all organizations and individuals that endanger social stability. Alexander Pierce immediately stood up and promised. Well, that's good. George said with a smile. There is one more chapter. Please collect and recommend. Chapter 228, First Encounter with Black Braised Eggs. George said these words to Pierce, which was also a warning given to him because Pierce had been very respectful to him in the past few years. If Pierce did not do that crazy plan, it would be interesting to watch them secretly empty S.H.I.E.L.D. But a crazy insight plan directly exposed Hydra completely. In George's opinion, it was completely brainless behavior, so George gave some advice to the new director, who was about to take office today, hoping that he could listen to it. Minister, the new assistant assigned to you is already waiting outside. Would you like to take a look? Pierce asked immediately. Yes, let him in. George nodded and said. After Pierce went out, he soon led a black man in. George recognized that this was the future director of S.H.I.E.L.D., whose full name was Nicholas Joseph Fury, also known as Nick Fury. At this time, Nick Fury was not bald, and he was not blind in one eye, so it was a little early to call him a black egg. Then, Pierce handed over a resume. His name was written on the resume. He was a colonel when he retired from the army. Later, he joined the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, and became a spy. He carried out many missions, including Belfast, Bucharest, Belgrade, Budapest, and everywhere. The military's evaluation of this person is that he has excellent command and combat capabilities, and the CIA's comment is that he is an excellent intelligence agent. Because of his outstanding resume, he was recruited into the Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Bureau, but he has been engaged in civilian work, so this time Pierce arranged him to serve as an assistant to George. Very good resume, capable of action, smart, and understands procedures. George looked at the resume on the table and said, "Thank you, Mr. Minister." Black Braised Egg said, "Minister, I'm glad you are satisfied." Pierce said with a smile. George closed the resume, shook his head and said, "It's a pity to put such a good agent here as my assistant. Going out on field work is the most suitable position for him." The unformed Black Braised Egg cannot be as unexpressive as in the future. When he heard the boss in front of him say that he wanted to suggest him to go out on a field trip, his face suddenly lit up. Going out on a field trip has always been his pursuit. "Well, since the minister thinks he is suitable for field work, I will arrange it later. I will arrange the assistant later." Pierce said, "Well, you have just taken over as director. Some things can be done slowly." George said with a smile. When George established SHIELD, he had thought about meeting Nick Fury, the future black-hearted director. It was just that after his intervention, this boiled egghead might not have the ability to make money in the original timeline. He still wanted to set up dozens of personal bases. Dream on. The current Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Support Bureau has the most stringent financial audit system under George's suggestion. The annual financial audit is stricter than the internal audit, and every expenditure must have an accurate source. At that time, it was precisely because George made great contributions to the management system of SHIELD that he was recommended by other directors as the Minister of the Council. The financial audit of the entire SHIELD is conducted by a professional team directly led by the council. It is impossible to get the money from the Black Bureau through procurement, empty salaries, etc. What? All the actions of the agents are confidential? Yes, then the director must personally write a report and submit it to the board of directors. After the action is completed, a detailed action report must be submitted, and then the review team will review it. It can be said that the review system created by Artificial Intelligence Wiki made George feel a little numb after seeing it. However, thinking of this big gift prepared for Black Braised Eggs, George felt it was very necessary. Just when George was about to get off work, he received another reminder from Artificial Intelligence that Cheyenne Laboratory received a message from the universe. "Wiki, have you found out the meaning of this message?" George asked. "I have found out. It is an encrypted message used by the Kree army. According to the information obtained before, after deciphering, the meaning of that message is that it has been discovered." "Has it been discovered?" George repeated. "It seems that this should be that Marweya dismantled the communicator on her Kree Empire cruiser before coming to Earth to prevent being discovered. Now someone has sent her a message from the Kree Empire. It is no wonder that the Skrulls on the spaceship did not contact their own people for several years after Maul's death and lived alone in the spaceship. It turned out that the communication device was removed." Then, George called Jia and asked her to arrange for him to visit the Pegasus Project tomorrow. In the afternoon, the Pegasus Project Laboratory received the news that George was coming to visit. You know, as one of the parties in the cooperation, Star Group has invested a lot in this project in terms of materials and personnel over the years, but it is the first time that such a large-scale visit has been made, which no one expected. Nellis Air Force Base, the United States, is where the test site of the Pegasus project is placed. In the early morning, Carol came to the hangar where the Pegasus project stored aircraft early, sat on the hood of the car, and blew the cold wind. She liked this kind of weather. At this time, a kitten ran to her feet, and Carol bent down and gently stroked the yellow-orange cat. "Gillu likes you," Dr. Lawson said to the pilot Carol. "She is generally not very close to people." "You got up so early," Carol said. "Actually, I stayed up late at night and had work to do, so I couldn't sleep," Marvel said. "Does it sound familiar? I never think of flying as work," Carol said with a smile. "The scenery is beautiful, isn't it?" Dr. Lawson said. "I prefer the scenery up there," Carol said. "You'll be able to go up soon, Ace," Dr. Lawson said. When George arrived, the hangar was ready. After listening to Lawson and Howard's introduction to the entire plan, George stood next to a uniquely shaped aircraft. "This aircraft is the ISIS fighter with a new engine installed," Howard introduced to George. "Has the test flight time been determined?" George asked for the first time since the visit. "Well, it has been determined. The test flight will be carried out in 3 days," Dr. Lawson replied. "The two ladies next to them are the ace pilots who will perform this test flight mission. Carol Danvers and Mariah Rambo, female pilots. It's really rare." George looked at the two female pilots and said, "Please collect and recommend." Chapter 229 Carol Danvers. "Oh, female pilots. It's really rare." George looked at the two female pilots and said, "Why do you discriminate against female pilots?" Carol said with her head held high. Carol Danvers. George knew that this female pilot who was about to become Captain Marvel would complete a gorgeous transformation in a few days. After her strength increased greatly, even Thor was not her opponent in the future Avengers. However, she was impulsive, arrogant, and a little arrogant. But George did not expect that this future Captain Marvel would be so impulsive. In fact, these two female pilots were not simple. One became Captain Marvel, and the other, Mariah Rambo's daughter, also joined SHIELD in the original timeline. Later, because of an incident dealing with the Scarlet Witch, she accidentally gained superpowers, which were called Spectrum. Spectrum has the ability to see any form of electromagnetic wave energy and manipulate them. This ability is also very powerful. If it is well developed, it will become no less than Captain Marvel. But now with the appearance of George, there should be no more female hero Spectrum in this life. But Captain Marvel Carol, George is not going to stop her from appearing. Although her strength will be good in the future, George has already surpassed her. Let her go out into the universe and make some noise, saying that there will definitely be different surprises in the future. Carol. X for the flight instructor at the base. Dr. Lawson, Mariah Rambo and Howard all spoke up to stop them. Bucky and Jairing, who were standing behind George, heard someone speaking to their boss in this tone, and their eyes began to turn cold. In fact, after saying this, Carol had already begun to regret it, because the person in front of her was not someone she could afford to offend, and his casual words could make her lose this opportunity, or even ruin her entire military career. But the words had been said, and she could only wait for the punishment that would definitely come. "It doesn't matter. I just wanted to say that this era is not tolerant enough for you female pilots. The limit of their tolerance for you may be to let you perform some test flight missions." George bowed his hand and continued, "But sometimes, your personality is really not likable. I hope that your flying skills are as strong as your personality. Drive Lawson, Howard, you stay, and everyone else go out," George said. "I'm very sorry, sir." Dr. Lawson apologized for Carol. George looked at Dr. Lawson, smiled and didn't answer. In fact, George knew that Dr. Lawson in front of him was disguised by Marvel from the Kree Empire. It would be more appropriate to replace the word disguise instead of disguise. Because the real Dr. Lawson had been made a fool by her and thrown into a mental hospital. Her purpose of sneaking into the Pegasus project was to use the cosmic cube as an energy source to develop a new type of engine. All her secrets were clearly known by George from her mind when she first came. Judging from the ISIS fighter next to her, her experiment should have been successful. Just now, George had used his ability to get all the technology of this fighter. However, this fighter did not use the cosmic cube directly as an energy source, but used the super engine that used the energy block extracted from the cosmic cube by Dr. Zora during World War II as the core energy source. This is understandable. After all, there is only one cosmic cube, and it is impossible to use it as a luxury for only one fighter. But what George found interesting was that he did not find the cosmic cube and Marvel's energy bracelet in this base. It seemed that this traitor of the Kree Empire had bad intentions and moved the valuables. Howard, who was standing next to him, was still in the dark. He didn't know how he would explain to S.H.I.E.L.D. You too, the Pegasus project has been going on for decades, and we have invested more than $2 billion US, and we have given you something as important as the cosmic cube for a search, so I hope you won't let us down. George looked at the two and said. George found that, when he mentioned the cosmic cube, Marvel's heartbeat obviously accelerated a lot. Of course, we have also invested too much energy and time in this project. Howard said. Yes, so we will definitely succeed. Dr. Lawson said. Haha, that's the best. George didn't say much and left the hangar accompanied by the two. Outside the hangar, Bucky, Jia-Rang, Carol and others stood on both sides of the door in a clear distinction. Jia-Rang looked at Carol coldly. In Jia-Rang's mind, she had already made up her mind that she would ask the military to replace the test pilots after returning. As one of the partners of the Shyama project and the general manager of Xingchen Group, Jia-Rang had every right to ask the other party to do so. As for whether the test flight mission would be delayed, that was a question for the military to consider. After greeting the military representatives in the base, George took Jia-Rang and Bucky and left the Air Force Base. On the way back, George saw Jia-Rang's thoughts, so he took the initiative to say, Jia-Rang, let's leave Carol's matter alone. But, boss, Jia-Rang wanted to say more. It's just a small matter. If I pursue it further, it will make me look too petty and intolerant. Joe said this to Jia-Rang in Cheyenne Cheo language. Okay, I understand, boss. Jia-Rang nodded. Hey, boss, please communicate in English, there's me. Bucky shouted in front. I told you to learn Chinese a long time ago, but you just wouldn't listen. Who can you blame if you can't understand it now? And how are you doing with the Russian I asked you to learn? George asked. Boss, Chinese is too difficult to learn, but Russian is no problem now. Bucky replied. Well, then you prepare in a few days and go to the Red House. You can stay there longer this time, and you need to pay attention to General Drekhov. By the way, there is also a little girl named Natasha. Remember to treat her like Patton. George instructed. Undercover mission? I like it. By the way, boss, are you asking me to learn Chinese for future undercover missions? Bucky asked curiously. Of course not. I asked you to learn it, just because it is a beautiful language. George said with a smile. After sending Jia-Rang back to the company, George and Bucky came to the moon base. Knowing that the Kree Empire had sent people to pursue Maul, George naturally would not be without any preparation. If, like the original timeline, a small team was sent, it would be fine. If the pursuer sent was a fleet, George could just use it to train his soldiers. However, this is not the most important thing. The most important thing is that George entered the invisible Kree cruiser of Marvel again, after arriving at the moon base. There is one more chapter. Please recommend and collect. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 230 Air Pursuit. In the captain's room, George found the cosmic cube and the energy bracelet in the box. The cosmic cube was the first cosmic gem George had come into contact with. George had briefly owned it a long time ago. After a long journey, it was now back in George's hands. He took out the wooden box that originally stored the cosmic cube from the space and put it in. This time, George did not need the special energy inside, nor would he swallow it directly into the chaotic space. What George needed was the knowledge about space, contained in the space gem. In the next few years, this knowledge will be the focus of George's research. Moreover, the cosmic cube itself was also designed to the plot of the future timeline, so George would naturally not keep it for himself. As for the energy bracelet, although George had already understood all the principles, it would be a waste to just leave it here, so he planned to take it away this time, and it would be a good collection in the treasure housed in the future. On the other hand, after George left, Carol was taught by the leaders of the experimental base. There was no way, even Howard Stark only represented SHIELD. George is the only private enterprise among the partners, and his position in S.H.I.E.L.D. is not comparable to that of Howard now. The repeated scolding also made Carol, who originally felt that she was indeed impulsive, even more dissatisfied. That night, she went out with her friend Mariah for a crazy night, throwing aside the ban on the base. However, she did not expect that she would receive a call from Dr. Lawson when she was still resting at home in the early morning of the next day. "Hi, Carol, I need you here. If you can, please come as soon as possible," Dr. Lawson said a little anxiously on the other side of the phone. Of course, no problem. After Carol hung up the phone, she immediately knocked on the door of Mariah Rambo across the street. "Mariah, we need to go to the base." Mariah opened the door and heard Carol say to herself, "What?" Mariah, who was still asleep, asked. "Carry out the mission without asking for reasons, remember? Hurry up, let's race to see who reaches the finish line first," Carol said. Then on the road in the early morning, an old Mustang and Camaro were seen racing fast. However, the backward old Mustang suddenly drove into the military base from the Fork Road. It was obvious that the Mustang's driver Carol had violated the rules again, because the sign of no entry could be seen on the signboard of the Fork Road. When Mariah, who was lagging behind, arrived at the hangar, she saw Lawson walking back and forth anxiously at the door of the hangar. Because although she received the message that she was discovered 2 days ago, it should be some time before the pursuers arrived in Marwell. But she didn't expect that today she would receive the news that the other party had entered the solar system again. But she had already put the energy bracelet on the spacecraft. If the other party chased her, she would have no power to resist. So today she called Carol and the others over, hoping to use their identities to open the aircraft key and drive the new fighter back to her laboratory. In Marwell's view, as long as she returned to the laboratory and put on the energy bracelet, she could survive this crisis. As for what will happen to this planet next, well, it's none of her business. Girls, remember I told you that I built this fighter to end the war, and I'm going to save lives, Marwell said. So I need to borrow your ID cards. I will fly the plane myself this time. No, if it's a matter of life and death, then I will drive it. After all, I'm more familiar with the performance of the ISIS fighter, right? Carol said seriously. In fact, up to now, Carol and Mariah thought that Dr. Lawson was going to meet someone, or just borrowed the fighter. So they didn't take her behavior of driving the fighter away without permission seriously. At this moment, outside the Earth, another cruiser of the Kree Empire was parked there in stealth. A Kree Empire carrier-based aircraft flew out of the cruiser and rushed towards the Earth in stealth mode. George, who was watching everything, became disappointed when he saw that there was only one battleship. In this case, the meaning of training was lost. After letting Bucky continue to stand by, George returned to Earth and kept an eye on what was happening to Carol and the others at the moment. Soon, the ISIS fighter slid out of the hangar under Carol's control and came to the runway. Dr. Marvel replaced Mariah in the co-pilot seat. After the fighter plane rose into the sky, Marvel shouted in the communication channel, 5229-47 8.7680. Carol replied, "Got it. Where are we going, Doctor?" "My laboratory," Marvel replied. Originally, Marvel was going to fly the plane back to the cruiser by herself, but now that Carol was driving, she decided to wait until she got to the cruiser to confess her secret to Carol. Marvel believed that with Carol's help, it would be easier to achieve her goal. "Your laboratory? What do you mean?" Carol asked curiously. After all, the two had just flown out of the experimental base, and now Dr. Lawson said he was going to his own laboratory, which confused Carol company. That is. At this time, Carol looked at the sudden black spot in the distance and asked curiously. No, Marvel saw the familiar fighter plane and immediately knew that she had been found. Wait, what is that? Carol was still curious about which side the fighter plane that suddenly appeared in her field of vision belonged to. It's not displayed on my radar. Go, Carol, fly. Marvel reminded anxiously. That's not a Miji fighter. Who are Dr. Lawson and his men? From Dr. Lawson's expression, she must know the other party, so Carol asked immediately. That's a bad guy, fly faster. Marvel said. At this time, the fighter plane, that Carol had never seen before, was following closely behind her ISIS fighter plane, and the other party had already opened fire. Yes, sir. After all, Carol was an excellent pilot selected from layers of layers, so she quickly calmed down. The pursuit has been from the troposphere to the exosphere, and then back to the troposphere again. The other party has been chasing closely. Energy bombs kept flying around the fighter plane driven by Carol, which was very dangerous. What do they want? After controlling the fighter plane to roll again, Carol asked Marvel. Me, my research. I shouldn't have brought you here. Marvel replied. Obviously, this is not the time to say this. Facing the enemy planes chasing behind, Carol said to Marvel, it's going to be hard. Please recommend and collect. Chapter 231 Surprise Birth. Facing the pursuit of the unknown enemy aircraft behind her, Carol reminded Maul and directly performed a fighter's Fralov chakra action. This is a shape in which the aircraft rotates at a low speed around the tail, forming a dead loop with a very small rotation radius. After completing this action, Carol successfully went around the back of the enemy aircraft and completed the attack and defense exchange. Unfortunately, the maneuverability of the enemy fighter far exceeded that of the ISIS fighter she was driving, so that the aircraft's weapon system could not lock the opponent. Carol accelerated to approach the opponent and wanted to shorten the attack distance, but she didn't expect the fighter in front to suddenly fire from behind. They fired from behind. Hold on, Carol said as she prepared to make an evasive action. However, the energy attack of the enemy aircraft was too dense, and the ISIS fighter piloted by Carol was unfortunately hit by an energy bomb on the left fuselage, because the distance was too close. The ISIS fighter quickly lost control and began to roll continuously. The plane began to fall directly from the high altitude to the ground. Parachute, parachute, parachute. Carol wanted to prepare for parachute according to the flight training plan at this moment. But as she pulled the ring under the seat, although the canopy popped out immediately, the ejection seat did not move at all. As a fighter pilot, Carol naturally knew what this meant. At this moment, she could only stretch the fuselage as much as she could, so that the fighter could use the pine forest and the lake on the island in the middle of the lake as a deceleration, to reduce the impact after landing. Hold on, Dr. Lawson. Carol shouted to the doctor behind her. But she didn't notice that blue blood had already come out of the doctor's abdomen at this time, and even the strength to shout had disappeared. Then, the fighter kept swaying left and right under the huge impact, and plunged into the sand and rocks by the lake. Carol, reply. Did you receive it? Mariah asked. I received it. We crashed. Carol was lucky not to suffer any external injuries after the crash. Carol, are you okay? Received the reply. I received it. After taking off the helmet, Carol immediately got up from the driver's seat and came to the backseat of Marwell. Dr. Carol helped Marwell take off the helmet on her head while shouting. This also allowed Carol to see the wound on Marvel's head in the previous collision. Your blood is blue? Carol asked in surprise. Yeah, my hair is not messed up, right? Marvel knew that she was seriously injured and was ready to make a joke to ease Carol's nervousness when she saw the different colors of her blood. Help me, okay? Marvel said softly when Carol was still in a daze. Carol, who had just come to her senses, immediately helped the doctor unbuckle her seatbelt and helped her out of the fighter. As soon as she got out of the fighter, Marvel said to Carol, I have to destroy it before they get there. However, Marvel fell to the ground as soon as she finished speaking. Lawson. Carol shouted. Marvel obviously knew that she was running out of time, so she grabbed Carol's arm tightly and said, remember what I said about our job? What is the purpose? End the war. Carol replied. Yes, but the scale of the war is bigger than you think. Marwell looked up, glanced at the wound on her abdomen, and then continued, damn, my name is not Lawson, my real name is Marwell, and I'm from the planet Heir. I really want to say that you are confused, but we were just shot down by a spaceship, and your blood is blue. So I believe what you said about being an alien. Carol could only choose to believe what Orwell said at this time, after experiencing it herself. Listen, I have been fighting a shameful war for half my life. Go away, don't make me regret it more. Remember the coordinates, okay? Orwell glanced at the sky, and then continued, you have to save them alone. Who to save, and how to save? Carol asked blankly. I have to destroy the engine, before they find it. Orwell said as he took out a unique energy pistol from his arms. Then he was about to push Carol away, and struggled to sit up. But just as she raised the gun, and wanted to pull the trigger, an energy bullet accurately hit her left chest. Mavil fell to the ground, and lost her life instantly, and the energy gun also fell from her hand. Although Carol didn't know who the enemy was, or what happened, she still had the basic consciousness of a soldier. So she quickly picked up the energy pistol that Mavil dropped and pointed it at the direction of the energy bomb attack. Carol looked at the smoke and dust that filled the air due to the crash of the fighter plane, and looked at Mavil who fell to the ground and died at a loss. At this moment, a figure slowly emerged from the smoke and dust. We don't mean to hurt you. A man wearing a blue battlesuit and looking no different from an ordinary human said after walking out of the smoke and dust. Really? Because your fierce firepower makes me feel that way. Carol said excitedly, pointing the energy gun at the man not far away. Where is the energy core? The man asked. Obviously, the Kree Empire team that was chasing them also knew the existence of the special energy core, but they didn't know that the so-called ability core was actually the cosmic cube. And after being brought to the cruiser by Mavil, it was taken away by George. The paratroopers will be here soon. You will be surrounded in 2 minutes. Carol was still trying to scare off the man with the rescue. Then there is no need to talk nonsense with you. The man raised his energy gun and was about to shoot. No, wait. Carol shouted immediately. Carol knew that she had a good talent for flying the plane, but she was not sure that she could hit the opponent with an unfamiliar weapon, so she spoke first to attract the opponent's attention. Sure enough, after hearing Carol's words, the man put down his weapon again and wanted to hear what she would say specifically. Do you want to ask about the ability core? Carol pointed to the energy core installed on the ISIS fighter with her head and asked. At this time, due to the tumbling of the fighter and the collision and friction with the ground, the armor at the tail of the fighter had completely fallen off, and the entire engine had been exposed, and the energy core inside was shining with a sky blue light. The man also followed Carol's signal and shifted his attention to the wreckage of the plane between the two. Carol took this opportunity to turn the gun around and aimed directly at the energy area on the fighter's engine and pulled the trigger. No, the man yelled after he found out, but it was too late. As a huge blue light spread out, the ISIS fighter made a huge explosion. A blue energy shock wave rushed over in the direction of Carol's attack. There is one more chapter. Please recommend and collect. Chapter 232 Experiment Failure. George stood at a distance and saw this shockwave containing space energy. He knew that this energy was the key to Carol's transformation. However, George did not intend to rob Carol of this opportunity. You know, this kind of mutation is very rare, and there are countless coincidences in it. George is not sure that another person can complete this mutation 100% safely. Didn't you see that several years later, Black's altered egg sacrificed countless people and finances to replicate this incident, but ultimately failed? Even Black's altered egg's Tahiti plan was just a byproduct of the entire experiment. The energy hit Carol's body and instantly wrapped her whole body. In this 1,000th of a second, the space energy instantly completed the transformation of Carol's body, and then the remaining energy was absorbed into Carol's body. However, Carol's body was a little overwhelmed after absorbing such a huge amount of energy at once. Her body began to show energy characteristics, and her eyes began to emit blue light. In the next moment, a wild wave of energy burst out from Carol's body, and the pursuer, including Carol herself, was blown away by the energy. At that moment, George felt that a space channel was opened instantly. On the other side of the space channel was a very small energy space, which was also connected to Carol. However, in George's perception, the energy space on the opposite side was too small, less than the size of a house. George immediately thought that the energy space on the opposite side must be the energy source of Carol's binary state. Moreover, Carol was also transformed into an energy absorption system by the space gem, which was why she could survive the first wave of energy impact. This made George admire her very much. Such a good thing actually happened to Carol. Of course, it is not uncommon for Carol to be lucky enough to encounter an ownless energy space, but this is the first time George has seen it with his own eyes. Like Cyclops in X-Men, his eyes are connected to an energy dimension. Darkseid in DC time, Dormammu encountered the dark dimension, and so on. But George does not envy Carol, an energy transmitter who only knows how to squander energy. If a Camotage wizard gets Carol's opportunity, then this universe may have another dimension demon. This is the difference between a systematic knowledge inheritance and no knowledge inheritance. However, although George saw all of this, he would not be a good teacher to point out the way for her. Carol's outspoken character is destined not to be inferior to others. If he can't subdue Carol, why should George teach her these things? The pursuer from the Kree Empire recovered quickly from the energy shock because of the relatively long distance and the protection of the battlesuit. When the Kree stood up, he looked at the energy that was constantly dissipating from Carol's body not far away in surprise. "Commander, she's still moving. Can we fire?" At this time, another female member of the Kree pursuit team asked the Kree man with a gun. "Don't fire," the man ordered. After the female member put down the energy rifle, she and the commander she mentioned slowly came to Carol's side, walking through the big pit left by the explosion. The female team member glanced at the location of the ISIS fighter plane and said, "Nothing is left. The energy core has been destroyed." The Kree man picked up a piece of debris on the ground and said to Carol, who was still adapting to the energy, "She absorbed the energy of the energy core. She wants to go with us." Then the man picked up Carol and walked towards their own aircraft. When the Kree aircraft disappeared into the sky, George came out of stealth. Then, not far from George, the space shattered like a mirror, and a man wearing yellow clothes and a hood walked out of it. "Master Ancient One." George greeted. "George, long time no see," Ancient One said, after putting down his hood. "Yes, it's been a long time since we first met." George looked at the bullwoman in front of him and said with emotion, "I wonder what you are doing this time." Guyi looked at George with her ever deep eyes and then said, "Of course, I'm thanking you for solving a crisis on Earth. That's not necessary. I did that for myself. No one likes to place a bomb at the door of their house, right?" George said with a smile. Guyi just smiled and didn't refute, and then said, "And I guess you also know about the cosmic gems. The cosmic cube in your hand is the space gem. Do you want me to give up this gem?" George asked. "Of course not." Guyi smiled and said, "At least in my opinion, although the world has changed a lot because of your existence, and the fate of many people has been changed, but the general direction has not changed. So, I will not interfere with what you do." George understood what Guyi meant. As long as George didn't disturb her retirement plan, she wouldn't interfere with any of George's actions. "Of course, I have no ill will towards this world," George said with a smile. Guyi glanced at the helicopter flying in the distance and then said to George, "Come to Camotage when you have time. There are some of my private collections for you to read." "Thank you, I will go when I have time." George nodded. Guyi nodded, then turned and disappeared again. George, who didn't want to meet the rescue team, also teleported back to New York directly. As for Guyi's invitation, forget it. George didn't want to be too deeply involved with Camotage. After George returned to New York, he received a report that pilots Carol and Dr. Lawson violated regulations and privately flew the ISIS fighter without any authorization. In the end, the plane crashed due to improper operation, and the 2 people on the plane were eventually killed in the explosion. A small piece of identity tag was the only clue found at the scene of the incident after the search and rescue personnel carefully searched. This matter was quickly taken over by S.H.I.E.L.D., and the incident area was carefully explored again, and finally the black box of the ISIS fighter was found in the lake. So the conversation between the two after the plane took off was also recorded in detail, but what happened after the black box fell off was not recorded and therefore unknown. Some other unusual clues were also found, such as a notebook left by Dr. Lawson that no one could understand. The incident was eventually determined to be a man-made accident. Dr. Lawson was considered to have mental problems, and Carol was determined to have drunk too much the day before, and even the possibility of taking bad drugs was not ruled out, so the two had hallucinations in the sky. Mariah Rambo, who they last saw, was also forced to retire because of this incident. The entire Pegasus project was completely sealed. Please recommend and collect. Chapter 233 Zhu Wenwu's opportunity. Of course, the matter is not over at this point. If the loss is caused by the failure of the experiment, it is naturally nothing. However, if it is ultimately due to management problems, then responsibility needs to be determined. So much investment cannot be wasted like this. The military as the experimental base and SHIELD as the main body of the experiment have an unshakable responsibility. Now that the cosmic cube is lost, it is impossible to continue the experiment. These compensation disputes cannot be resolved in a day or two. Naturally, Jiaying will handle it, and George does not need to worry about it. What George needs to deal with now is the accountability of the World Security Council to SHIELD. As George warned Howard before, all parties have invested huge resources in the Pegasus project. Now SHIELD not only has to take responsibility for the supervision of the experiment, but also lost the very important cosmic cube. For SHIELD itself, this matter naturally cannot be let go so easily. Finally, Howard, as the person in charge of the Pegasus project experiment, has an unshakable responsibility in the whole incident. First, the use of unknown people did not discover Dr. Lawson's mental state problems in time. Second, improper supervision caused the cosmic cube to be lost during the experiment. Although, in the end, Howard was not expelled from SHIELD because of his personal social status and military relationship, he was no longer the head of the R&D department and went home to reflect. Howard was also very disappointed after being punished, even though he did make mistakes that could not be ignored. However, for Howard, who was very concerned about his reputation, how could he continue to stay in SHIELD after being deprived of the position of head of the R&D department? This basically doomed him to retire. For this reason, Howard also found George specifically, hoping to get help. However, George directly handed the voting book to Howard, which clearly stated 4 votes to 1 vote. The other 4 directors unanimously approved the punishment of Howard. Not throwing Howard directly into prison was already a result of his past merits. Howard returned to his laboratory disappointed, and then Alexander Pierce came over. "I'm very sorry, Howard, I can't help you this time. You know, my punishments were all decided by the higher-ups." Pierce patted Howard on the shoulder and consoled him. "It's not your fault," Howard said dejectedly. "Have you gone to see the minister? You've known each other for so many years, he should be able to help you." Pierce asked. Howard shook his head, forced a smile and said, "The other 4 directors have unanimously agreed on the result, and he has no good solution. However, I can also take a good rest and spend time with my family. Don't be too discouraged," Pierce said after a little contemplation. "In fact, there is room for reversal." "Oh, what do you mean?" Howard asked. "If you can come up with a scientific research result that they can't refuse, then they will naturally withdraw the punishment on you," Pierce suggested. Howard thought for a while, and then said excitedly, "Pierce, you are right. As long as the results I bring out make up for this mistake, those people will naturally shut their mouths. Just think it through, then you think slowly. Remember to hand in your identification card tomorrow morning. You will not be able to use this authority after today." Pierce patted Howard's shoulder again and said meaningfully. Howard, who was thinking about what research he should do with his head down, his eyes lit up, as if he had thought of something. So he didn't notice the smile on Pierce's lips when he patted his shoulder. After becoming famous, Howard participated in many large-scale research, from the earliest super soldier serum, Manhattan Project, the large reactor project developed by the Cosmic Cube, to the current Pegasus project. There are more other missiles, conventional weapons and other technologies. Among these projects, the Large Reactor Project, and the new element he discovered, are prepared for the future Tony, and naturally they will not be contributed. So after excluding them, the Super Soldier Serum Project once again caught Howard's attention. First of all, this project is a project that various organizations are currently developing, and it has broad prospects. Secondly, this project was a joint research project between him and Dr. Erskine, and he had an innate advantage. So Howard finally set his sights on this. That night, Howard used his authority to enter the SHIELD database and searched for information all night. A few days later, he spent a lot of money to buy a tube of Shia Bradley's blood. As for the blood sample of Captain America Steve Rogers, there would be no shortage of Steve before or after the change. Of course, these were Howard's own choices, and George was not interested. Everyone has his own fate, just like Zhu Wenwu, who took down the underground forces in Southeast Asia after he came out again. But not all was smooth sailing. During this period, he met a group of Han from Jaya Benji. Jaya Benji has become a country famous for tourism and special service industries because of George's deliberate suppression after World War II. So Jaya Benji's gangs are now particularly developed. When Zhu Wenwu and his Ten Rings gang began to occupy territory in Jaya Benji, they would naturally encounter resistance. But at the beginning, those resistances did not cause Zhu Wenwu too much trouble until he met the Hand. Although the ordinary members of the Hand also have good combat power, his Ten Rings gang's men are not inferior to them. What makes Zhu Wenwu feel more difficult is the so-called 5 leaders of the Hand, who call themselves the Five Fingers. Not only are they outstanding in martial arts, they also master a kind of energy called ki, and the ki is that they have the ability to revive after being killed. What Zhu Wenwu didn't know was that the Five Fingers of the Hand were actually traitors of the Eastern Kunlun Holy Land. After Mrs. Gao, who was the guardian of Kunlun at the time, discovered that dragon bones had the effect of prolonging life and resurrecting people, she joined forces with Alexandra, Botu, Salander and Murakami to steal dragon bone fossils to extend their lifespans. After being discovered, they directly fled Kunlun with some dragon bones. Over the past hundreds of years, they have used dragon bones to prolong their lives several times, so that their dragon bones have not been preserved much. It was not until Zhu Wenwu basically killed them all that the two sides sat down for peace talks. The Hand also finally accepted the rule of Zhu Wenwu's Ten Rings gang and was willing to spend money to eliminate disasters. Anyway, what they pursued was never money. In addition to money, the Shuhahu told Zhu Wenwu about a place called Taro. It was a secluded village where magical skills were passed down from generation to generation. Please recommend and collect. Chapter 234, Give and Take. After experiencing George's extremely powerful fighting power, Zhu Wenwu met the Five Fingers with inherited skills again, and naturally developed a desire for martial arts in his heart. So after pacifying the entire underground force, Zhu Wenwu also began to put all his thoughts on the exploration of tarot legends, and he did not want to give up any opportunity to become stronger. On the other hand, after the Pegasus project was stopped, Bucky was also thrown into Russia by George, and then was finally selected into the Red House as an instructor according to the plan. There he met the little girl Natasha that George told her about. Natasha Romanov. Smart, witty, very alert, and learn things very quickly are Bucky's evaluation of this little girl. Bucky has great sympathy for this little girl who grew up in the Red House, so although he is very strict with her in daily training, he also gives her the greatest care in life. This special care is also regarded as a reliance by the young Natasha. In this life, Natasha is no longer facing the cold winter soldier Bucky, so her fate is naturally different. Time flies by, countless people are working hard for life, even George's life is not easy. Although he does not need to worry about his livelihood, countless obscure spaces still make George's scalp swell, especially there are many things that George has not yet understood. Although George had come into contact with the cosmic cube before World War II, because his ability was not strong enough at that time, he did not touch the cosmic cube with his skin, so he missed the biggest gift of the cosmic cube knowledge. The Red Skull and SHIELD used it as a kind of energy, which was really a waste of money. A lot of functions were wasted. A supercar was used to transport goods, which might be the sadness of the cosmic cube. Because, compared with the power gem that can provide huge energy, the body of the cosmic cube is the space gem. In fact, the moment George touched the cosmic cube, he understood that just like the power gem requires the user's body to be very strong, the space gem also has strict requirements for the holder. George guessed that all gems should have pan consciousness, and those who cannot be recognized cannot exert their maximum power. Of course, the gems should not mind the way that Thanos only uses some of his abilities with props. Now George has forged a piece of equipment similar to the Infinity Gauntlet through the knowledge of alchemy, runes and magic circles. But George has no intention of crushing the energy cube outside the space stone now. After all, George is still planning to use it to fish. If SHIELD doesn't recognize this treasure, it will be troublesome. The Infinity Stones have been held by many people, and most of them use them with the help of a carrier. In the original plot, Ronan the Accuser used the Power Stone with his technological hammer, Loki used the Mind Stone with the scepter, and Malekith directly turned the Reality Stone into ether particles, and then relied on his own body. They all used the Infinity Stones as a tool, but there are also very few examples. They have a deep relationship with the Infinity Stones, such as the Ancient One, who can borrow a little power from the stones even without the Time Stone. George has a strong desire for exclusivity, and the Infinity Stones are his goal that he must get. So while studying the Cosmic Cube, George is also thinking about how to leave his mark on the Cosmic Cube. But the process was not smooth until George remembered the method of using one's own energy to nourish treasures in the novels he had read. Even so far, George has only learned countless space knowledge from the gem, and there is no chance of recognizing the master. What's more regrettable is that the Cosmic Cube does not obey George's wishes, so he can't use the teleportation function. The result of forcibly using it will definitely be tragic. George remembered that in the previous Life movie, Loki had been holding the Rubik's Cube in Avengers 3, but he did not use the Cosmic Cube to save the people of Asgard, nor could he save himself. George remembered that in the original plot, the only one who really used the Rubik's Cube for precise teleportation was Thanos, who got 5 Infinity Stones and used the power of the prop glove to use the Space Stone. Without knowing the coordinates of the Soul Stone, even if George can use the Space Stone to use precise teleportation now, it is useless. As for the names of the planets recorded in the movie, they are not very meaningful because different civilizations have different ways of naming planets. Just like the Earth is what we call our own planet. If there are other extraterrestrial civilizations, they will definitely give the Earth a number or a more local name instead. Yondu called this place Terlan Planet, the Kree called this place Planet C-53, and the Asgardians called this place Midgard. It is impossible that George shouted a name and the Space Stone sent George to that place. As for the countless space knowledge, it is also very meaningful to George. In fact, he has a lot of space abilities, such as the secret space door of Kamatage, the door key in Harry Potter, shape-shifting, space teleportation brought by the eyes, instant movement under the cover of chaotic space, magic circle teleportation, mirror space, etc. George himself has many ways to obtain these abilities that others cannot obtain. After obtaining the knowledge in the space gem, he spent a lot of time analyzing these abilities and then completely turned this knowledge into something he mastered. Don't think that this behavior is unnecessary. In fact, this is exactly the difference between Eastern and Western practice. Eastern practice emphasizes understanding and mastering the essence, while the West is more about development and application, and the effect. Just like Thor, he is obviously a thunder god, but he turned himself into a hammer god alive, and there are few superpowers in the West to achieve immortality, which is also the reason why they do not pursue the essence. However, George still has the way of thinking of his previous life, so he still pays great attention to the mastery of the rules. Every effort will be rewarded, but many times, the reward may not be what you expect. December 15th, 1991, is destined to be remembered by many people. Because this month, after the blow of the Pegasus project, Howard Stark finally reproduced the super soldier serum after nearly 2 years of concentrated research. Excited Howard rushed out of the laboratory excitedly, and then gave his wife a big hug. Now his next step is human experimentation, which is very important in the use process. Don't think that after a super serum is developed in the movie, it can be put into use directly. In fact, even Steve Rogers is just a lucky lab mouse. The consequences of those experiments without going through the formal process can be seen from the Green Goblin and Lizard Professor Connors. Please collect. Please recommend. Chapter 235 Tony's Moment of Regret. Although Howard Stark's research on the super soldier serum has been preliminarily completed, since the project was completed in the laboratory in his own manner, there are naturally no conditions for human experiments here. Whether the super soldier serum he developed will be truly successful in the end depends on the results of human experiments, but choosing who to cooperate with for human experiments is another question. There are two partners in front of Howard, one is SHIELD and the other is the military. SHIELD is a department he created, so Howard naturally has feelings for it, and his original intention of developing the super soldier serum is to make up for the mistakes of the last Pegasus project, and return to the position that originally belonged to him. But the military is not bad either. His own Stark Industries has been supported by some people in the military all the way. Although the purpose is to prevent George's military-industrial enterprises from dominating, the fact is that it has helped Stark Industries to occupy a part of the arms orders, and the military has been behind the scenes when he got into trouble several times. Not only that, on the other hand, SHIELD represents the 5 major countries, while the military only represents the United States. On this day, Howard thought about it for a long time. Finally, considering that his family's company is a military-industrial enterprise, it will naturally need the support of the military in the future. So Howard called General Ross, an acquaintance in the military, after dinner. "General Ross, long time no see." Howard said. "Yes, Howard, I heard from Abadia that you are working on a new product recently. How is it? Is it successful?" General Ross asked. "Not bad, so I called you," Howard said with a smile. "Oh, I don't know what kind of equipment this time that took you, a genius, so long?" General Ross asked. "This time it's not ordinary equipment, but super soldier serum," Howard said. "You succeeded?" On the other end of the phone, General Ross was obviously excited. General Ross, whose full name is Thaddeus E. Ross, participated in the Vietnam War and was later promoted to Lieutenant General. He joined the team responsible for monitoring scientific research to predict future threats. Howard also met General Ross at that time, and General Ross happened to be in charge of this area, so it was most appropriate to find him. "Yes, the laboratory part has been completed. Now the only thing missing is the human experiment," Howard said. "Great, where are you now? I'll send someone to pick you up right away," General Ross said. "No, I'm in Long Island, New York. If you send someone over, it will be too conspicuous. Christmas is coming soon. I think there should be a lot of banquets in Washington, right? My wife and I will drive to Washington in the name of attending a cocktail party," Howard said. "Well, the human experiment will be carried out in the Pentagon. I have a laboratory there that can be used for experiments. I will also invite some old friends to visit the experiment. Do you need me to prepare anything for the experiment?" General Ross asked. "No, General Ross. Although my improved super soldier serum cannot reach the level of Dr. Erskine at the time, it does not require so much trouble when injected, and does not require other auxiliary equipment," Howard explained. "That's good, then I'll wait for you," General Ross said happily. "General Ross, I look forward to meeting you." Howard also hung up the phone with a smile. Unfortunately, what Howard didn't know was that his phone had been tapped by others. So the conversation between him and General Ross was placed on Pierce's desk that night. Looking at the intelligence in his hand, Pierce clenched his fists, then looked out the window, and after a while he said to himself, "Howard, this is all your own choice. Don't blame me." As he said that, a phone call was made from Pierce's office. But Pierce didn't expect that his call was also recorded. George saw the news at breakfast the next day. But without paying much attention, George would send someone to save Howard and would not stop Hydra from assassinating him. Because Howard was just an acquaintance to George. His original pure businessman character did not please George, so how could George save him? Moreover, the souls of people like Howard had long been watched by Hell, so even if it was Howard's soul, George would not collect it, because it was not in George's interest for him to go to war with Hell alone. The next day, Mariah, who had received advance notice, packed up her things early in the morning and sat in front of the piano in the living room, playing and singing, "Try to remember the beauty of September, when the grass is still green." After Howard packed up, he came to the living room and saw Tony lying on the sofa. "Wake up, Kit, say goodbye to your father." Mariah reminded Tony, who is the homeless man on the sofa. Howard, who was wearing a suit, deliberately asked his wife. Tony stood up, wearing a Santa hat on his head, and said to Howard, "This is why I love to go home for Christmas. Because you will leave. Speak nicely, dear. He has finally come back after studying abroad." Mariah played the piano music by herself, and did not forget to mediate between the awkward father and son. "Really? That girl in school, what's her name?" Apparently Howard would never back down even in front of his son. "Candace," Tony replied. Howard took off Tony's Santa hat and threw it aside, then said to him, "Please, don't burn the house down before Monday." "Okay, then I'll burn it down on Monday," Tony said directly. "Got it. I'll arrange the time for my robe party accordingly." Tony walked over to Mariah and saw that she and Howard were dressed very formally, so he asked, "Where are you going?" "Your father is taking me to the Bahamas for a vacation," Mariah answered while playing the piano. "Maybe we have to go somewhere else first," Howard suddenly said. "Going to the Pentagon?" Tony asked, then leaned down to his mother Mariah and said, "Don't worry, you will definitely like the holiday menu of the restaurant there." Howard pointed at Tony and said, "It is said that irony is a standard for measuring a person's potential. If that's true, you will definitely become a great man in the future." Apparently Howard was also stimulated by Tony's venomous tongue. After Howard finished talking to Tony, he said to Mariah, "I'll go get my bag." Then he walked into the bedroom. "He missed you terribly when you were away." Mariah closed the piano lid, stood up, and continued, "To be honest, you will miss us too. Wait for your father to come out and have a good talk with him, okay? Please collect and recommend." Chapter 236 Howard's Funeral. At this time, Howard came out of the bedroom with a bag on his back. Unfortunately, Tony didn't say a word to him until Howard walked out of the house. For Tony Stark, today has always been the moment he regrets the most. After Howard drove Mariah from Long Island, he first went back to Stark Industrial Park to meet Abadia. He also dealt with some accumulated official business of the company. When he drove out of the company again, it was almost night. Just like the original timeline, Howard was attacked when he passed a fork in a small road. Although Hydra didn't have a super soldier like Steve, it didn't have enough body, but it had technology. You have to know that Zora's mechanical ability is also very powerful. 2 power mechanical arms can completely make up for the gap, not to mention that the assassination was to ordinary people. The next day, the police received the alarm and came to the scene, and then the military and SHIELD all came to the scene. Except for the empty trunk, there was no trace of super soldier serum. For many people, the death of Howard Stark is definitely a big deal. Not to mention that when the military knew something was missing, this area was blocked by countless people. According to the military's idea, they had to dig deep to find the person who took away the super soldier serum. However, since Hydra had taken action, how could there be obvious loopholes? And several hours had passed. Even if there were loopholes, Hydra had already made up for them. There is a saying that movies tell stories, while reality tells logic. Since Hydra had already taken action, how could it leave obvious evidence like a videotape? So the disc was taken away by a Hydra agent, who was performing a mopping up mission. George took the disc in his hand, and did not let it spread out now. Even if it was spread out, it would be useless. Just like the original timeline. To say that SHIELD and the military did not know that there was something wrong with Howard's death, that would be a pure insult to people's IQ. Howard's funeral will be held a week later, and George will naturally attend it at that time. After many days of investigation, the death of Howard and Mariah was concluded to be a traffic accident. Reporters across the United States went crazy again, and then Tony, the genius, was on the cover of major newspapers again. There were all kinds of stories about the lucky boy who inherited billions of dollars, the youngest billionaire, and other messy things. Among them, Tony's bad things such as his love of partying were also exposed. The biggest impact of Howard's death was the turmoil in the stock of Stark Industries. For ordinary people, the death of Howard, the founder of Stark Industries, would inevitably reduce the expectations for Stark Industries, so the decline of Stark stocks became inevitable. However, this is not the end for the giants holding Stark stocks. Anyone with a discerning eye can see that his successor, Tony Stark, is a genius who is not inferior to Howard. Then, with the cooperation of all parties, and in order to give ordinary people confidence, the name of Tony the Genius was once again widely publicized. Not to mention the impact of Howard's death on Stark Industries. At least George knew that, if he did not intervene, Stark Industries with Tony would develop even stronger. On the second day after Howard's car accident, a group of uninvited guests appeared in Stark Industries. They swept away all the information in Howard's office before leaving, and it was Nick Fury who led the mission. Now Stark Industries is in a trance, and Abadia is still busy stabilizing the company's situation. So when Black Salted Egg borrowed the credentials of a police agency to take away all the information, he was not stopped. When Abadia checked and found that only some park model information was lost, he did not pursue it further because he knew that Howard's general information was generally kept in the laboratory in Long Island Manor. When Alexander Pierce got the super soldier serum privately, the other Hydra leaders naturally wanted to get a share. After all, the assassin used was the only finished product left in the Zora period, and it belonged to the common property of Hydra, so the proceeds this time were also common proceeds. However, the specific role of these 5 tubes of super soldier serum still needs to be tested. The executor of this assassination mission is a good choice, and the remaining serum is given to Baron Strucker for a search, hoping to find the formula of the serum. Just when Pierce found that the super soldier serum was indeed effective after human experiments, and asked someone to hand over the remaining reagents to Baron Strucker, an accident happened. A Russian undercover agent accidentally snatched one of the serums. Fortunately, the other party did not know the existence of Hydra, otherwise it would be a big trouble. General Ross of the military regretted the most. His carelessness made him miss the super soldier serum. However, this also pointed out a clear way for him. Although he did not have anyone comparable to Howard, he could not stand up to others. Therefore, the military secretly started the research of super soldier serum under the promotion of General Ross. A few days later, Howard's funeral was held in the Stark family cemetery. The rain outside the car window kept falling, and the whole world seemed very quiet. Today, George was wearing a black suit and a white shirt with a black tie. When he got off the car, someone had already held an umbrella for him, and he also came to see off the boy who had clamored to surpass him. Mr. George, thank you for coming in person. As an old friend of Howard, Abadia helped Tony, who was in a state of panic, to organize all the matters of the funeral. George just nodded and did not make any other response. At this time, many people had already arrived in the cemetery, including Pierce from SHIELD. George also saw Black Saucegg, several other generals in the military, represented by General Ross, several congressmen in the government, who were on good terms with Howard and often appeared in newspapers, were also present. Standing at the outermost edge were some partners who had business dealings with Howard during his lifetime. Howard's funeral was very solemn and very quiet. After George appeared, the group of people made way and let George stand in the front row. Not far from George was Tony Stark, with red eyes and a lonely face. At this time, Carter was standing beside him, but George did not go up to talk to Tony, but just nodded to Carter as a greeting. After the memorial service, George placed a chrysanthemum in the pile of flowers in front of the tombstone, walked past Tony, patted Tony on the shoulder, and then left the cemetery. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 237, Chaotic International Situation. George has long been open-minded about birth, aging, sickness and death. Many of his friends have slowly left the world over the years, including his earliest subordinates and former business partners. Therefore, there is also such a cemetery on Hogwarts Island. For George, death is not the end of life, but just the beginning of another way. But no matter what, life needs to go on. Although Howard's death has brought some turmoil to the Marvel world, it is like a stone thrown into a pond, which will cause ripples, but will eventually return to calm. 1992 was a turbulent but peaceful year. After all, this world is the Marvel world, which is different from the original time and space. And with George's intervention, many major historical events have changed. Because of George's layout on the Arabian Peninsula, There is no Syrian-Israeli conflict, and Iran no longer has the courage to attack Kuwait. After all, a unified Arab kingdom is not something they dare to touch. The modern high-tech weapons that George has deployed on the peninsula have also provided great confidence to the people of the peninsula. But what can never be changed is the greed of the ambitious, and because of the unification of the peninsula, countries like the United States have more urgent demand for oil. And with Hydra fanning the flames, it is even more impossible for the world to remain calm. The oil and gas resources in the Middle East are very tempting. In the face of huge interests, the United States wants to firmly grasp control. The Arabian Peninsula cannot be touched, so it can only focus on Iraq. Then, in the eyes of the outside world, a very sudden war broke out. When a war broke out in a neighboring country, the Arabian Peninsula was naturally on alert throughout the whole process. After the multinational forces led by the United States entered Iraq, the war soon had a result. Because the United States had been prepared for this war, the equipment it brought was the most advanced high-tech weapons, among which the mechanical exoskeleton launched by George was the most eye-catching. This war was simply a dimensionality reduction strike for Iraq. Even if the opponent's military literacy and combat capabilities are not weak, their strength is too weak in front of the advanced missiles, fighter jets and aircraft carriers of the US military. The United States not only fought a very beautiful battle, but also showed the world the strength of modern electronic warfare. This battle also woke up the world and let everyone see the tremendous changes in modern warfare. It was this war that the United States re-established its status as a world military power after the Vietnam War. The turmoil in the world may be what Hydra is most willing to see. When the war between the United States and Iran was going on, the Soviet Union was also not stable. With the continuous efforts of the separatists, the Soviet Union was divided into 15 countries overnight. Originally, Dreykov, as the leader of the Red House of the Soviet spy organization, had his ambitions expand. After injecting his friends with super soldier serum and succeeded, he was no longer satisfied with listening to the orders of others. On the night before the split, Dreykov secretly destroyed all the information about the Red House stored in the government, which means that the Red House has become his personal tool. And an unequal war in the Middle East once again made him set his sights on the United States. Therefore, under Dreykov's planning, a group of spies headed by the super soldier Red Guard Alexei secretly sneaked into the United States, targeting the US government's northern laboratory. Ironically, as the world's #1 spy organization, SHIELD did nothing about what happened in secret. But it played a significant role in the US-Iran war. What's even more ridiculous is that SHIELD also asked the Arabian Peninsula to join the war, but was directly rejected by the peninsula. Obviously, Pierce did not listen to George's words, but Pierce's actions were not without gain. According to the information George received in advance, this year's Nobel Peace Prize is likely to be awarded to the Hydra leader. This made George wonder what expression the Nobel Peace Prize judges would have if they knew that he had awarded the Peace Prize to a Hydra who was afraid of chaos in the world. There is an old saying in the East, if you walk by the river, you will get your shoes wet. This sentence is the most appropriate to describe Alexander. Since taking office in SHIELD, Alexander Pierce can always be seen wherever there is war. This year, there happened to be a resistance force in Colombia. Pierce, who is committed to expanding the influence of SHIELD, would naturally not miss such an opportunity. Unfortunately, not long after Pierce and his daughter entered the Colombian Congress, the entire hall was occupied by the rebels. Pierce was lucky and was rescued by the embassy guards, but others were not so lucky and all became hostages of the rebels. It happened that Heir was assigned as the person in charge of Colombia. After hearing that his director was in trouble, he soon appeared at the scene. Arriving at the scene, Heir immediately showed his professionalism. After reading the architectural drawings, he proposed a plan to conduct a raid through the sewer. Pierce naturally rejected this risky plan. His daughter was in there, and he would not approve any risky action. Pierce advocated negotiations with the rebels. Anyway, this was Colombia, and he didn't need to pay for any conditions. Unfortunately, what he didn't know was that the rebels didn't negotiate with them at all. When the rebels returned to the basement to massacre the hostages, the basement was empty. It turned out that Heir didn't obey Pierce's direct order, secretly launched an attack from the sewer, killed the guards, and rescued more than a dozen officials and Pierce's daughter. In fact, if Heir didn't succeed this time, his future in SHIELD would have ended there. In foreign countries, if you order a mission without authorization, the consequences of failure can be imagined. However, this matter is very risky, but the rewards for Heir are also very rich. He was completely in the eyes of Pierce, the director, and was transferred back to China after the incident and was promoted. The personal relationship between the two began from then on. In Black-Blooded Egg's words, Pierce was someone he could trust with his back. After reading this information, George almost laughed out loud. In fact, in his opinion, the two were completely in a mutually beneficial relationship. Pierce used Black-Blooded Egg's trust to hide the existence of Hydra, and Black-Blooded Egg used Pierce to get promoted. If the relationship between the two was really as good as Black-Blooded Egg said, why didn't we see Black-Blooded Egg tell Pierce about the aliens? If Pierce knew about the existence of the Skrulls, perhaps he would not have started that stupid plan at all. Again, movies tell stories and reality talks about logic. People like Black-Blooded Egg who engage in conspiracy have dirty hearts, and you can't believe a word they say. It's the weekend. I have something to do. It's late. Sorry everyone. Please collect. Please recommend. Chapter 238 Spy. George was not moved by the complex situation in the world. Not only that, he, the largest capitalist in the United States, would also get a very large profit, or in fact, he was the biggest beneficiary. Speaking of resources, another country with unique resources is obviously not as honest as it appears. That is Wakanda, a small African country with vibranium resources. After the acceleration of social and technological progress, Wakanda still advocated not to contact the outside world. But in fact, their non-contact with the outside world is just not to reveal the truth about their country to the outside world, but they do not exclude the science and technology of the outside world. Since World War II, this country has secretly sent some tribesmen to the outside world to sneak into developed countries every year, and then use their innate racial advantages to explore various advanced technologies. It is said that in the dark, as long as they close their eyes and do not show their teeth, no one can find them. After their spies brought back high technology, combined with their special vibranium technology, they gradually developed a unique technological path. Under George's gaze, it can be clearly seen that Wakanda, a country, has rapidly changed after absorbing knowledge from the outside world. From an agricultural and pastoral country, it has developed into an industrial country, and then a technological country. It has been developing silently, and now Wakanda's technological level is at least 20 years ahead of the outside world. Originally, George coveted the country's resources before discovering the underwater vibranium, so he set up a special anti-stealth radar for the vibranium stealth technology, which was placed in the mountains outside Wakanda. Any high-speed moving object flying out of Wakanda will be surveyed by the radar controlled by Wiki. Then it will be recorded, and a special person will go to the scene to confirm. It can be said that George has a more detailed list of spies than Wakanda itself. And George remembered that something bad would happen to the Wakanda royal family this year, so he notified Wiki in advance, and notified himself immediately if there was any movement. For example, today, under Wiki's monitoring, a stealth Wakanda fighter quietly flew to California, USA. After receiving the news, George recalled the plot a little, and knew what would happen next. According to the time, it should be the younger brother of the king, a member of the royal family who was exiled by Wakanda, job, because he wanted to change Wakanda's closed policy, and wanted many people who were hiding in the slums like him to live better. So he cooperated with Ulysses Claw, and stole some vibranium. After this matter was leaked and reported back to Wakanda, King Chaka came to California, USA this time with the purpose of killing his younger brother job. Because, in the eyes of King Chaka, Job's behavior was undoubtedly a naked betrayal. Under George's arrangement, a special operations team soon appeared directly outside Job's civilian building from the lunar base. According to George's plan, this team did not need to save Job. As long as he was killed and waited for his son to return to the room to retrieve the notebook, his son would be taken to the security base for training. When the time was right, he would be thrown directly into the team responsible for executing the Pentagon's orders for the most brutal training. Anyway, with Unit 0, George could make him live well even if he died. Sure enough, in the video transmitted by Starnet, King Chaka was much more decisive and cruel than shown in the movie. He had no intention of bringing Job back for trial and personally executed him. Moreover, after killing his brother, although he knew that he had a son in his teens, considering his son's future inheritance rights, Chaka would naturally not bring the boy back to Wakanda. As for killing the boy directly, Chaka also took into account the tribesmen who followed him, so it was not easy to do it directly. However, how long can a 10-year-old child survive in such a chaotic slum after losing his parents? King Chaka, who left in a hurry, did not know what kind of disaster his momentary weakness today would bring to his country. Time flies. On a weekend in September 1994, in an upscale community in Ohio, the United States, a girl with dyed hair was riding a bicycle down the road in the community, and her friends on the roadside entertainment facilities greeted the little girl enthusiastically. "Hi, Natasha." The little girl also waved her hand and greeted them enthusiastically. After Natasha returned home, she put her bicycle back in the garage, whistled a whistle with a unique meaning, and followed the laughter into the backyard. A 4-year-old girl was playing happily on the swing. When the little girl saw Natasha coming, she immediately played the game they often played. "We are both upside down." The little girl said. "I bet you will fall first." Natasha said with a smile. You will fall." The little girl said loudly. "You can't hold on for much longer," Natasha said, and deliberately made a joke. The little girl laughed at Natasha's funny expression and fell down without noticing. "I told you that you would fall first." Natasha stood up and said to the little girl with a smile. Obviously, the little girl was not convinced, and the two began to chase and play in the backyard. The little girl accidentally fell to the ground. "Mom." The pain made the little girl cry and call for her mother unconsciously. At this time, a young and beautiful woman heard the shouting and came over and squatted beside the little girl, asking, "What's wrong?" The little girl dived into her mother's arms, crying but not answering. Natasha said, "She fell down." "Oh, did you hurt your knee?" The little girl's mother wiped the little girl's knee, then kissed her knee and said, "A kiss will be fine, just like this. Get up, little girl, you are a brave girl." The girl's mother took her hand and walked towards the house in front step by step, and then said, "All the pain will only make you stronger." The sun sets, and countless fireflies fly in the sky. This is a very normal and happy scene for an ordinary family, but it is not ordinary for this family. In the evening, the male owner of this family returned home, and the little girl's mother prepared dinner as usual. The two girls also sat quietly at the dining table, ready to enjoy the food. So the young girls did not notice their father, who had a different look than usual. Soon, with the man's words, they hurriedly ended the dinner that had just begun. Natasha knew that her quiet life was over, and she would have to go back to the training camp, which was like a devil's den to her. Chapter 239 Choice. That's right, this seemingly warm family is the Red Guard family assigned by Dreykov to the United States to steal research data of a project in the Northern Laboratory. Although they are called the Red Guard family, in fact, these 4 people have no blood relationship at all. They are just spies selected from the Red House to perform this task. The man is Alexei, the Red Guard, and the one with hair, dyed in several colors, is Natasha Romanov. The little girl is just a random one selected from countless baby girls in the Red House and named Yelena. The mother is Melina, the Black Widow of the Red House. In fact, in the era when all major spy organizations were established, the Red House formulated a Black Widow plan. All female students who graduated from the Red House were called Black Widows. This is not just a specific name for an individual. The Red House called them Black Widows because these female agents are petite and skilled, just like the most deadly spiders. They can easily escape the attention of others, and when you find her, everything is too late. It is obvious that tonight the Red Guard Alexei has successfully obtained the experimental data that he had been lurking for almost 3 years. So facing the exposure of his spy identity, the peaceful life that was very beautiful for these 4 people has come to an end. A few days later, Natasha and Yelena were thrown into the training camp again. According to the original timeline, Natasha will always be controlled by the Red Room until she is recruited by SHIELD, and then she thinks she has escaped the fate of being controlled. This time must be different, so not long after Natasha was thrown back into the training camp, she was taken out again, before she was controlled by Drekhov using new control methods. Outside a room, George and Bucky looked at Natasha, who was vigilantly observing the surroundings in the room. Bucky suddenly asked at this time, "Boss, why make such a fuss? Can't we just kill that Drekhov and make the Red Room our own? We can also rescue those abducted children." George looked at Bucky and smiled and said, "It's not that simple. If you kill one Drekhov, another one like Drekhov will appear. There is no point in killing him. It's better to leave it there. Anyway, it's just a small problem that can be solved at any time for us. Besides, Drekhov still has a strong political attribute. We never take the initiative to participate in any political struggle." Then he gestured to Natasha inside and said, "Besides, the Red House is also a gift I left for Natasha. When she grows up, she can leave it to her to deal with it herself. Boss, since you value her so much, why?" Bucky thought of something, but didn't ask it out loud. "Are you asking why you didn't bring her back earlier?" George asked. "Yes." Bucky nodded and replied, "Bucky, you have to know that many people are born extraordinary. I believe you have also seen the genetic potential assessment data of the Red House. Natasha was not randomly selected, but selected by the program," George said as he walked out of the corridor, and then said, "Since she was born extraordinary, everything she is experiencing now will become a powerful motivation for her. However, Bucky, I can give her a choice." "What kind of choice?" Bucky asked after following George's footsteps. "She can choose to live an ordinary life, or choose to become a warrior like you to seek revenge on Drekhov and save her family." After George finished speaking, the electronic door of the corridor happened to open. George paused for a moment and continued, "Okay, let's go see her. The little wildcat should be very anxious." After saying that, he walked out, leaving Bucky alone. In this world, there are many people who can freely choose the life they want. But for some people, fate has never given them a choice, and Natasha Romanoff is one of them. If Stark turned back from the dead and became a hero, then Natasha is the prisoner who has been struggling to control her own destiny. In other words, Natasha was just a poor tool who was manipulated by others in the original timeline. She finally sacrificed her soul in exchange for the Soul Stone because of the choice she made for herself. Since birth, Natasha has been trained as a killer and has received very inhumane and shameful training courses. After being recruited by SHIELD, she thought she had finally escaped from the Red Room and regained her status as a free man, but in fact she only changed from a killer to a SHIELD agent, and she still did not change her identity as a tool. It was precisely because of the dissatisfaction with SHIELD that she uploaded all the information of SHIELD without hesitation. Even if it exposed herself, she would drag SHIELD along with her. After S.H.I.E.L.D. was disbanded by Hydra and joined the Avengers, Natasha was still looking for freedom. Whether it was Iron Man, Stark, Captain America, or other members of the Avengers, they just regarded the Avengers as an organization. Only Natasha regarded the Avengers as a family, and every Avenger was her family, so she could take the initiative to sacrifice herself for her family. Someone once said that Natasha had unclear relationships with many male members of the Avengers. This is actually impossible, because since Natasha's world, every black spider that came out of the Red House had its important organs removed. Therefore, it can only be that Natasha has been getting along with her family with sincerity from beginning to end. What? Hulk has an unclear relationship with Natasha? Come on, how can Hulk, who is still a child in his heart, understand the love between men and women? But he knows who is sincere to him, so Hulk treats Natasha differently. As I said, logic is important in reality. Originally, George was prepared to let some characters develop, but after he became stronger, his vision naturally changed. Moreover, some small things on Earth will not affect whether Thanos will come to Earth to snatch the gems. As long as the time gem is in Kamatage, this will not change. Since it will not affect Thanos bringing the soul gem to Earth, if George can change the fate of some people according to his own wishes, he will naturally do it. Isn't George's efforts to develop power and strengthen his strength just to be able to live happily as he pleases? If George is still timid, what's the point of working hard to become stronger? George didn't play in person, just wanted to play the game in a different way, to add some happiness to life. Haven't you seen that those big guys will find some interests for themselves? Dewan likes to collect, and Gayo shines and likes to watch various duels. If there is no fun, what is the difference between eternal life and curse? Please recommend and collect. Chapter 240 Regret. So after Bucky brought Natasha back, George was willing to give Natasha a chance to choose. However, no matter what she chose, at least this time she would not be treated as a tool that could be discarded at any time. However, no matter what choice one makes in life, there will be regrets, because only with regrets can there be growth. Just like Zhu Wenwu in front of George. George slowly poured tea into the 2 teacups in front of him, and then signaled Zhu Wenwu that he could taste it. Zhu Wenwu bowed his head and thanked him, then picked up the teacup and tasted it carefully. George also picked up the teacup and took a sip, then put down the teacup and then said, "Old Zhu, I don't know what made you come here specially. Boss, this time I have a request. I hope you approve it." Zhu Wenwu said respectfully. "Well, you are so polite, tell me," George said with a smile. In fact, since the first meeting between George and Zhu Wenwu, the two sides will meet again at the annual Underground Parliament meeting. But George didn't care about those false formalities, because Zhu Wenwu looked like a movie star in his previous life, and was from the Celestial Empire, so George was more casual in addressing Zhu Wenwu. Zhu Wenwu would not use the word you when talking to him. "Well, boss, I met a very good woman, so I want to retire," Zhu Wenwu said with a smile in his eyes. "Haha, the woman who caught your eye must be extraordinary," George said with a smile. "Yes, she is very special." Then Zhu Wenwu told George the cause and effect of the matter, including the information provided by the hand, and then he finally found the entrance in a huge bamboo forest in the Celestial Empire, and then met his destined girl Yingli. Now Yingli is going back to Taro village to return the special abilities given by the dragon, and Zhu Wenwu came to George to propose the idea of retiring. It's rare to be able to make you, or 1,000-year-old iron tree, feel emotional. If I don't agree, it would be a bit unkind, so I agree to your retreat. George picked up the teacup and took a sip, then smiled and nodded and said, "When you leave later, I will let Bucky go back with you. The underground forces still need someone to control them. If you have a good candidate, you can also propose it. Of course, I welcome you back at any time. Come, I'll use tea instead of wine. Congratulations." George raised his teacup and said, "Thank you, boss." Zhu Wenwu also raised his cup and said. The 2 teacups touched each other lightly, making a ding sound. Zhu Wenwu only felt a little trance, and then he drank the tea in the cup. After the 2 chatted for some more gossip, Zhu Wenwu said goodbye. After Zhu Wenwu dealt with the remaining things, he and his wife returned to Bohemia City to live in seclusion. Zhu Wenwu also collected the 10 rings that had accompanied him for 1,000 years. The 2 were very affectionate and began to live the life of ordinary people. The wedding of the 2 was very simple. Although Zhu Wenwu had lived for thousands of years, he did not have many friends. Yingli had lived in the small pocket latitude of Taro since she was a child, and she had no acquaintances in the main world, so she only invited George and Bucky, 2 people who were considered friends, to have a meal together as a wedding banquet. After the 2 were together for 10 months, Yingli gave birth to a boy for Zhu Wenwu and named him Shanghai. With Zhu Wenwu's accumulation of thousands of years, there was no shortage of money, so they did not need to work for a living. Except for occasionally going to the mountains to hunt game, Zhu Wenwu would stay in the mountains most of the time and live a carefree life. Although the Dragon of Taro took back Yingli's magic power, her martial arts that she had practiced were not lost, so Yingli would occasionally teach Shanghai. This peaceful life was exactly what the 2 were pursuing. 3 years later, their little daughter was born. With the company of their 2 children, life became happier. In Zhu Wenwu's words, after so many years, he finally found something worth growing old for. Unfortunately, the good times didn't last long. One day, Zhu Wenwu went down the mountain to purchase supplies, and Yingli began to teach her son Taro village's martial arts as usual. a group of uninvited guests suddenly broke in, and Yingli fought with the other party to protect her children from harm. Although Yingli's martial arts were still there, it was difficult for a hero to fight four hands, not to mention that the other party was a large group of men. After defeating several people, she was eventually defeated by the other party and was killed by the other party. However, all this was secretly seen by the young Shanky. When Zhu Wenwu came back, he saw Yingli lying in a pool of blood and Shanky kneeling beside her. After burying his wife, the furious Zhu Wenwu put on the 10 rings again the next day, and then took Shanky directly to the other party, killed the gang in front of Shanky himself, and taught his son that blood debts should be compensated with blood. After returning home, Zhu Wenwu began to use his previous relationships to explore the forces behind the group of people while strictly training his children. He hopes that his children can be strong. He can't always stay with his children. He hopes that his children can also have strong skills and protect themselves one day. A few years later, under Zhu Wenwu's investigation, he finally knew that the group of people was behind the hand, but when he was about to take his son to revenge, Shanky did not dare to face the killing, so he ran to the United States secretly. Although he was very disappointed with his children, Zhu Wenwu also let Shanky go after revenge, allowing Shanky to live an ordinary life in the United States. Until Zhu Wenwu began to look for a way to resurrect his wife. His spirit was eventually attracted by a mysterious voice behind a dark door in the Taro space, and then eroded. He thought that the people of Taro village had captured his wife's wife, and he could reunite with his wife, as long as he opened the dark door. So Zhu Wenwu once again focused on studying how to open the door of Taro village. In the end, it was discovered that the real path to open Taro village was hidden in a pair of jade pendants worn by his children. Zhu Wenwu began to send people to attract his son who lived in the United States back to Bohemia City. When Shankai met up with his sister, he brought them both back home. Of course, a third-generation Chinese girl who was extremely ugly was also brought back with his son. Soon after Zhu Wenwu got the route, he summoned some of his former subordinates and prepared to attack Taro village to rescue the soul of his imprisoned wife. However, by chance, his children escaped from home with two people who didn't want to do it and entered Taro before him. Please recommend and collect. Chapter 241 Changing Destiny. A few days after his children escaped, Zhu Wenwu entered Taro with his men. After meeting the villagers of Taro village, the two sides fought directly. Just as Zhu Wenwu was heading towards the dark gate, where he thought his wife was imprisoned, his son stood opposite him. This time Shankai did not escape, but stood up and bravely faced Zhu Wenwu. The father and son fought together, and finally Zhu Wenwu defeated Shankai with the help of the 10 rings, and then opened the seal with the power of the 10 rings. But what came out of the seal was not the soul of his wife, but a kind of soul-sucking monster and its king. In the end, Zhu Wenwu died because his soul was sucked by the king of the soul-eating monster, but at the moment before his death, Zhu Wenwu left the 10 rings to his son Shankai. Ding. Before his death, Zhu Wenwu seemed to hear a very far and very close pleasant porcelain collision sound in his ears. When Zhu Wenwu came to his senses again, he found that he was holding a teacup, and George opposite was looking at him with a half smile. "Boss, what happened just now?" Zhu Wenwu asked in surprise. It seemed as if many years had passed in that moment, and everything that happened was still vivid in his mind. Recalling the grief and fear when he saw Yingli's death, he still felt a lingering fear, even though he knew it was just an illusion. Zhu Wenwu, who had lived for thousands of years, could not really think that he had just had a dream and a trance. The expression of the boss opposite also explained something. "Just now I just gave you a wedding gift," George said with a smile. In fact, when Zhu Wenwu proposed to retire, George knew what happened to him. Just now, George used the collision sound made by the moment when the two teacups touched each other to quietly invade Zhu Wenwu's sea of consciousness and gave him a real illusion. And everything that Zhu Wenwu experienced just now was what might happen without George's intervention. "Boss, will what I experienced just now really happen?" Zhu Wenwu, who had not yet calmed down, drank the tea in the cup in one gulp and asked George again. "Haha, old Zhu, you have lived for thousands of years. How many enemies do you have? Can you count them yourself?" George smiled and pointed at Zhu Wenwu, who looked very ugly. Old Zoo, you think the Hand Society would be so kind to tell you such a confidential matter in Taro Village? If Taro Village has so many benefits, why don't they occupy it when the 5 of them are as powerful as you? George poured himself a glass of water and took a sip, then continued, it's just borrowing a knife to kill someone. Whether you kill or are killed, they will not lose anything. After a pause, George said, but this time you are not at a loss, you also met your happiness, right? After a long while, Zhu Wenwu finally came back from the illusion just now. Even so, what they did should not be forgiven. Zhu Wenwu said with a fierce look in his eyes. Oh, then what are you going to do? Just go to the door, just because of a dream you had? George asked back. Boss, that's not you. Zhu Wenwu said. What do you mean by me? After all, it hasn't happened yet, right? We should at least have a reason for what we do, otherwise it's hard to convince others. George poured another cup of tea for Zhu Wenwu, and then continued, and have you thought about another thing? What is it? Zhu Wenwu asked doubtfully. Can you really grow old together? Your body has long been changed by the slow transformation of the 10 rings for thousands of years. Even if you give up the 10 rings, you will age very slowly, but your wife can only age at the speed of ordinary people. George explained. Then what should I do? Boss, you must have a way to solve it, right? Zhu Wenwu didn't think of these at all. He has been wearing the 10 rings for thousands of years and has never tried to remove them. He naturally doesn't understand these. Come and have tea. Since I have raised these problems, I will naturally help you solve them. George said with a smile. Zhu Wenwu calmed down after hearing what George said. He knew that his boss was not only unfathomable in strength, but also always kept his word. Therefore, Zhu Wenwu was completely relieved and took a sip of the teacup. If you don't want to be found by your former enemies, you can choose to live in seclusion somewhere else. Taro, Hogwarts Island, or I can provide you with a place. George continued while playing with the Panlang jade piece in his hand. As for your wife's aging problem, it is not difficult to solve. There are many options. You can choose to take potions, or practice other powers, or rely on external objects, like you can achieve it. Zhu Wenwu thought for a while, then said, Boss, it's hard to leave your hometown. I have lived there for thousands of years, so I naturally don't want to change places. Although Taro should be the most suitable place, according to Yingli, it is very exclusive to outsiders. You and your wife have a long life left, and there is plenty of time to consider a place to live in seclusion. Since you call me boss, I haven't paid you a salary in these years. I will help you solve these things. Let's go. It just so happens that I miss the morning tea in Bohemia City. George stood up and said. Then I would like to thank you first, boss. Zhu Wenwu also stood up and said. Then the two of them took George's private plane to fly to Bohemia City. On the plane, Zhu Wenwu also introduced George to the various magical creatures in Taro Village. George, who had watched movies in his previous life, knew that the appearance of the magical creatures in Taro Village was exactly the same as the mythical beasts in Eastern mythology. It's just that the difference in strength between the two sides is too big. It's simply a world of difference. George encouraged Zhu Wenwu to change a secluded place, and he was interested in the creatures there. And it would be very good if he could bring some back to Hogwarts. There are only some ordinary animals and plants on the earth in the forest of Hogwarts now, but it's a bit of a waste. On the way, George also received a call from Bucky and reported Natasha's choice. As expected by George, Natasha still chose the most difficult path. She wanted to save her family. George naturally supported this choice, so George agreed to Bucky's request to teach Natasha himself. Now, after the Kree left last time, George arranged a fast attack fleet for the special forces on the moon to be sent into the universe as mercenaries. Chapter 242 Yingli. There is no space for them to display their talents on Earth for the time being. Let them become cosmic mercenaries in the universe and hone themselves through repeated battles. Not only can they improve their strength, but also broaden their horizons. So Bucky really doesn't have much to do now. In addition to dealing with the information collected from the dark web all over the world, it is naturally no problem to train Natasha by the way. As for the follow-up of the Northern Research Laboratory, Bucky also asked whether he should intervene. In response, George replied that he would ignore it. Anyway, the Northern Research Institute has no direct relationship with him, so he doesn't care what it does. The Northern Research Institute in Ohio is a new government laboratory on the surface, but it is actually an important research center of SHIELD. What's even more ridiculous is that all the researchers there are Hydra, and their main research project is to combine the project of the Frozen Warrior, dissect and study the human brain, and draw the only cell blueprint of the basal neural node, which can achieve the function of controlling the cognitive center. In this way, self-help exercise and programmed learning will not be a problem in the future. It's just that, if your cognitive center is controlled by others, it's not very wonderful. George remembered that after Dreykov got the only information in the original timeline, he used this control method to build a huge spy network of his own. However, George had Unit 0, so he looked down on this control method that could be cracked by a tube of reagent and a bump on the nose. But it must be said that the group of Hydra scientists were really good. This method was indeed unsolvable without the antidote. As for the layers of disguise in the Northern Laboratory in Ohio, George felt funny. However, these were all trivial matters. The things in Taro Village were what George was interested in. The next day, George accompanied Zhu Wenwu, and the two appeared at the place where he first met Yingli. When George proposed to come here, Zhu Wenwu thought he wanted to occupy the entire Taro. In fact, if he hadn't taken Yingli's feelings into consideration, he would have done so. So after Zhu Wenwu told the exact location, he asked again, "Boss, why don't you bring more people here?" George looked at the murderous intent in Zhu Wenwu's eyes, and then sighed secretly. It turned out that he was indeed a terrifying figure in the legend of Western countries, and his personality was indeed very domineering. However, his purpose was not to occupy this space, so he patted Zhu Wenwu on the shoulder and said with a smile, "Old Zhu, what are you thinking about? I'm not a villain who only knows how to destroy. I'm here to solve their big problems. So, you just need to take me there, and you can leave. In this way, no matter what happens, Yingli won't blame you." Seeing Zhu Wenwu nodded, George also smiled and said nothing more. In fact, if he didn't want to deal with the soul-devouring beast, he wouldn't be here. If he really just wanted to occupy this latitude, he could just send Bucky to bring people here to deal with it. And it's not easy for him to get people. Nearly a million apocalypse demons are still staying in George's space. Maybe Zhu Wenwu and Yingli had agreed on a time in advance, so as soon as George and his friends arrived, they saw a young and beautiful woman in ancient costumes carrying a shoulder bag coming out from behind a tree. "Wenwu!" Yingli shouted. "Yingli!" Zhu Wenwu took a few quick steps and hugged Yingli in his arms. Zhu Wenwu's vision is indeed good. Yingli has the temperament of a chivalrous woman in ancient martial arts. She is heroic but charming. Especially when she looks at Zhu Wenwu, her eyes are full of love. Yingli raised her head, glanced in George's direction, and asked, "Wenwu, who is that?" Zhu Wenwu let Yingli go, then took Yingli's hand, and brought her to George, and then introduced Yingli to her. "Yingli, this is my boss, Mr. Swinton, whom I told you about." Zhu Wenwu turned around and introduced George. "Boss, this is my lover, Yingli." "Hello, Mr. Swinton." Yingli clasped her fists slightly and said to George in the Chinese language, "Hello, Miss Yingli. Now that old Zhu is going to retire from the world, it's better to call me a friend. Just call me George." George said with a smile. "That won't work. Just call me boss. I'm used to it." Zhu Wenwu said immediately, "Whatever you want." George said with a smile. Then he looked at the surrounding environment and then said to the two of them, "You go back first and wait for my news." "Okay, boss, then we'll go first." Zhu Wenwu said after hearing what George said, and then took Yingli's hand and walked towards Zhu Hei. Yingli didn't understand what was going on here, but Zhu Wenwu had told her about the general strength of his boss. So she was still worried about what would happen next. She was worried that George would do something that would harm the village, so although she was pulled forward by Zhu Wenwu, she always looked back in the direction of George unconsciously. After Zhu Wenwu took Yingli for a long distance, Zhu Wenwu saw that Yingli had not spoken, so he turned around and saw that Yingli was still looking back from time to time in the direction she came from. Zhu Wenwu stopped pulled Yingli over, smoothed her hair, and then said to her, "Don't worry, the boss means no harm, otherwise he wouldn't come here alone." Yingli looked back again, then looked directly into Zhu Wenwu's eyes and asked, "Wenwu, is your boss really as strong as you said?" Zhu Wenwu thought about it, then shook his head and said, "I don't know, because I can't block his punch, and even that punch was just a random punch he threw. So powerful." Yingli said in surprise, "Of course, otherwise how could he become my boss?" And, in fact, among his group of subordinates, there are people who are no less powerful than me. I may have a slight advantage in a one-on-one fight, but I'm not sure I can win in a one-on-two fight. He has 30,000 soldiers like this." Zhu Wenwu recalled everything he saw at the lunar base, then pinched Yingli's nose and continued, "So, don't worry, if the boss has bad intentions, I don't think anyone in this world can stop him." Yingli nodded, and then walked towards Zhu He with Zhu Wenwu's hand. After walking a few more steps, Zhu Wenwu seemed to remember something, and then asked Yingli, "Yingli, did you bring a pair of jade pendants from Taro Village?" Yingli paused for a moment, then asked, "Yes, Wenwu, how did you know?" Chapter 243 Strange Beast. When Zhu Wenwu heard Yingli's affirmative answer, he stopped again, and looked at Yingli in surprise and said, "It really exists?" "Yeah, that's right. I was planning to." Yingli was about to explain, when she heard Zhu Wenwu say, "It's for our child, right? It also contains the correct path to Taro Village." "Yes," Yingli said in surprise. She didn't tell Zhu Wenwu about taking out the jade pendant, let alone the secret inside the jade pendant. It turns out that it's all true. Zhu Wenwu looked in the direction they came out and muttered. Then Zhu Wenwu told Yingli everything that happened in the hallucination that appeared in his trance while walking. The story was very long, and Yingli listened very carefully, especially the part about her own death. She could clearly feel Zhu Wenwu's hand holding tighter. After the story was finished, the two were silent for a long time, and then they heard Yingli say, "Shanky, Xiling, both names are nice. But Shanky's personality really needs to be changed. It's not like you and me at all. And, well, forget it, he has no chance." "Well, I'll listen to you." Zhu Wenwu kissed the warm back of his hand. At this moment, he vowed to protect the woman in front of him with his life. If he had the chance to start over, he would never let the things in his dream happen again. On the other side, George looked around after they left, and then chuckled. When George accompanied Zhu Wenwu into the bamboo sea, he had already discovered that, although the bamboo sea looked very large from the outside, it was far less profound than when he was in it. As for the reason, it was very simple. According to the East, it was like a natural formation here that could confuse people's senses and make you unconsciously get lost in it. Even if you drive in, it is useless. Navigation can't play any role here. Another explanation is that the space energy here is relatively active, but that's all. It's hard for ordinary people to distinguish, but it doesn't work for George. But Taro can't appear directly in front of George, because Taro is just a pocket latitude attached to the main world. Unless the real entrance is found, the entrance will only appear for an hour on the Qingming festival every year. Of course, these may be very troublesome for outsiders, but definitely not George. Although George has not completely understood all the knowledge in the space gem in recent years, his understanding of space is already very profound. So George carefully felt the surrounding space fluctuations after releasing his perception, and then found an abnormal fluctuation point behind this hillside. Because the distance is very close, George did not use the teleportation ability. There is a latitude in trance nearby. Who knows if he will be teleported to other places if he teleports randomly. George came to a waterfall and found a cave behind the waterfall. No wonder ordinary people can't find this place. It is really hidden. Even the rocks behind the rags are just illusions, but they are useless in front of George. George did not enter from the side, but walked directly from the front of the waterfall. However, when the water was about to fall on George, the water droplets seemed to be suspended in time, and suspended around George. This was not because George used any means of using more water, but because the spatial energy affected the surrounding things, and produced an impact. George continued to step forward, and the surrounding water droplets shuttled back quickly like streams of light. A ball of water curtain wrapped George in it, constantly rotating, light and shadow flickering, and George walked out in a channel composed of water. Interestingly, George did not have a drop of water on his body. This end of the spatial channel was still in a glittering cave. Walking out of the cave, the rolling mountains and the strange flowers and strange scenery all over the mountains came into view. George could clearly feel that the energy here was very active and contained huge vitality. Green mountains and green waters, abundant vegetation, and abundant vitality are natural landscapes that can be called fairyland. Being in such a beautiful scenery, George also unconsciously slowed down his pace. The phoenix with flames flew across the sky. The snow-white nine-tailed fox stood proudly on the rock. Several emperors were lazily basking in the sun on the grass, and a group of cute unicorns were coming from a distance. Moreover, George felt a huge breath under the huge waters near the small village in the distance. However, in George's perception, these strange beasts, that looked like those in the classic of mountains and seas of the Celestial Empire, seemed to have inherited only the thin blood of the ancestors of the once powerful beasts. They did not inherit the supreme power and innate magical powers in the legend, but were only at the level of spirit beasts. Only the one under the water inherited a little more blood of the beast, so the breath was different. George knew that it was the dragon that Taro village had believed in for generations. But even so, it was very interesting. This was the first time George had seen so many oriental beasts, so he unconsciously wanted to tease them. These strange beasts were not afraid of George, but instead took the initiative to get close to George. Even the nine-tailed fox with a cold attitude came to George lightly and gently wrapped its soft tail around George's arm. A Digiyang took the initiative to jump into George's arms, and the fire phoenix kept circling and humming around his head. George understood that, although these beasts only inherited the thin blood of the ancient beasts, they were still very sensitive to energy. There was a kind of energy in George's body that made them feel friendly, and that was the energy that allowed them to evolve and return to their ancestors. George took out some fruits produced in the chaotic space from the space, and they were immediately fought over by the beasts. George took out a lot more and threw a few into the air, which were swallowed by the fire phoenix. George teased these beasts for a while, then put down the Digiyang and prepared to leave. The beasts were still reluctant to leave, and they all slowly followed George and walked slowly. In this way, a group of beasts followed George and walked towards the open space in the distance. In fact, when George entered Taro, the people in Taro village received a warning, and then they took their weapons and began to gather outside the village. How could outsiders come in at this time? An old man holding a long stick asked in confusion. A slightly younger youth said angrily, "Humph, who else could it be? It must be Yingli who revealed it to outsiders." "Aking, don't talk nonsense." Yingli swore in front of the dragon before leaving. The old man scolded the young man with a stern face. So when George walked onto the lawn, he saw the villagers of Taro village waiting for George's arrival with weapons in their hands, and a domineering Swanee stood majestically behind them. But George could see from their astonished expressions that they certainly didn't expect that George would be followed by such a large group of strange beasts. There is one more chapter. Please collect it. Please recommend. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 244, Guardian. You know, although these strange beasts have lost their wildness in the past few thousand years, not everyone can approach them at will. At this time, a woman who looked 70% similar to Yingli came out and asked, "Outsider, how did you get here?" George could guess that this woman should be Yingli's sister Yingnan. "Friends of Taro village, relax, I have no ill intentions." George smiled and greeted these people. "Don't use flowery words. Since you don't want to say how you got in, I won't ask any more questions. There is nothing here that you want. Leave here quickly," Yingnan also said, holding a long stick with two flaming red ends. It seems that Yingnan's status here is not ordinary. George clearly saw that the faces of several people changed when they heard Yingnan let them leave, but they still did not speak out to stop him. I haven't told you what I'm looking for yet. How do you know there is nothing here? George gently stroked the cute kitten beside him and said, stranger, I'm willing to give you a chance to leave, because these divine beasts like you. I hope you won't make a mistake. Yingnan slammed the long stick in her hand into the ground, making a loud bang. Ha. The villagers behind her also picked up their weapons and took up their positions. It is often like this, and it is difficult to explain it clearly. Although George did not intend to open the space door directly to let the apocalypse demon flatten this place, it does not mean that George wants to waste time with them here. Therefore, at George's thought, all the weapons in the hands of the villagers broke away from their control and flew to George's feet. Just when the villagers were surprised, the gravity of that area suddenly increased, making them all sit on the ground. Stop. An octogenarian came out with a dragon scale cane in his hand and was supported by others. George naturally noticed the old man, so he first restored the gravity of that area and then waved his hand. All the villagers stood up involuntarily and their weapons returned to their hands. George's move surprised them even more. Okay, let's go back. The old man walked to the front of the crowd and waved his hand to let all the villagers leave. The villagers themselves understood that if George wanted to do something, they could not stop him with their strength, so staying here would not be of any use. Yingnan handed the long stick to the man next to the old man and then personally supported the old man. George walked forward a few steps and the old man said, young man, you are very strong. I'm the village chief of Taro. They all call me Yingbo. George, who had been educated in respecting the elderly and loving the young for decades in his previous life, naturally clasped his hands and said, hello, Yingbo. Just call me George. George, well, you speak Chinese well. Yingbo smiled and then said, how about it? Are you interested in walking with me, an old man? Of course. George smiled. George turned around and said to the strange beasts, let's go back. The strange beasts were reluctant to leave and walked out of the village. Yingbo just smiled and watched all this, nodded, and said nothing. Behind the village, there is a wide river flowing quietly, and across the river are steep mountains. We have been here for 4,000 years to prepare for something we never want to happen. The old man looked at a huge stone door on the steep mountainside across the river and continued, we are the guardians of the dark portal, and we swear to defend this land and your homeland to the death. Don't be harmed by the demons trapped behind the door. George looked at the huge stone cave. The entrance of the cave was sealed by pieces of dragon scales. George could also feel that the pieces of dragon scales combined into a whole forbidden magic circle, which was the fundamental reason why the soul-devouring beast inside could not escape. Then George, under the guidance of the old man, came to a corridor. On the wall on one side of the corridor, some secrets about this space were carved. A long time ago, Taro's territory extended beyond the coastline of our small village. Our city surpassed any city in your universe, and it has a very rich culture and history. The old man pointed to the carvings on the wall and said, thousands of years ago, all the tribes lived in peace and prosperity, until they were attacked by the dark dwellers, who brought their army, and devoured every soul they passed along the way. Every killing makes them stronger. After destroying our largest city, they are ready to march into your universe to slaughter again. Taro's leader sent out the most powerful warriors to prevent them from reaching the portal to your world, but our ancestors were no match for them until the guardians joined the war and turned the situation around. The old man walked forward slowly. They worked together to drive the dark dweller army into the dark portal and lock them inside. The last carving was the dragon scale sealed door that George had just seen. The old man said nostalgically, since then, our people have been guarding this door. The magic of the guardian gave us power and the gift she gave us. In a wooden house, many craftsmen turned the scales in their hands into various cold weapons by grinding and hammering. These are dragon scales, which can be made into top quality armor. The old man looked at George next to him, and then said, many people came here before you, wanting to open the dark portal. For centuries, these people have tried and failed. They all have one thing in common. They are all attracted to come here by some voice from another world. A voice that promises to satisfy their strongest desires. So you think I was attracted by the voice of the Soul Eater like those people? George said with a smile. Before I met you, I thought so. But after meeting you, I changed my mind. The old man also said with a smile. George nodded and said, although I was not attracted by the soul-devouring beast behind the door, I did come here for it. The old man frowned and asked, I don't understand. Since you are not bewitched by it, why do you want to come for it? George did not answer his question directly, but said, Yingbo, let's make a deal. I will help you solve the soul-devouring beast behind the door, and you promise me a few things. Although I also want to agree to you, I don't have the right to bet the lives of the whole village with you. Yingbo shook his head and said, you tell me your conditions first. If we can do it, I don't need you to do anything, and I will agree to you directly. George understood that Yingbo knew that he couldn't beat him, even if he used force, so he took a step back. George shook his head and said, since you can't make the decision, I'd better talk to your guardian directly. He walked out of the door, and Yingbo was stunned and chased to the river. When they arrived at the river, their guardian was slowly rising from the water. Please recommend and collect. Chapter 245 Breaking the Ban. The reason why George was willing to listen to the old man's story was just because he wanted to know more about the situation in Taro Village. But you have finished your story, and you still want to stop me. That's meaningless. Respect the old, and love the young. If we really have to compare ages, I don't know who is older. When George walked to the river, he began to release his mental power towards the creature with a huge breath at the bottom of the river. Come out, George said directly in its mind through mental power. Then a blue light began to emerge from the bottom of the water, and as the blue light continued to circle, the river water in that area continued to rise. A dragon with a body length of hundreds of meters, with sparkling scales on its body, and a pair of dragon horns on its huge dragon head, but it is a huge gap from the legendary 5-clawed golden dragon, blue dragon and other legendary creatures. The scales of this giant dragon are mostly white, and George feels that the other party looks more like the legendary dragon. After the whole dragon emerged from the water, it coiled on the water flow, and the huge dragon eyes were looking directly at George. Although he didn't know what the relationship was between this dragon and the dragon in Kunlun, George understood that there was a clear gap in the strength of the two dragons. The most intuitive point was that this guy couldn't even speak. Human, who are you? Your breath is very special, I can feel it. Bailong said. Bailong naturally understood human language, otherwise how could he communicate with the villagers of Taro Village and give them the power of Ki? It was just because of its body structure that it had not evolved to the point where it could speak, so only people with mental abilities could communicate with it. It was not good at mental abilities, and the people in Taro Village had no way to enhance their mental power, so it had not spoken for thousands of years. Hey, it's still a female dragon. George also flew up and stood at a position similar to the top of Bailong's head, and then said, this is more or less. I don't have the habit of looking up at others. Hello, the guardian of Taro Village. My name is George, and you can call me master if you like. Of course, George could also directly become bigger, or control the dragon to become smaller, but if he just wanted to talk to it, there was no need to be so troublesome. Human, I have lived here for 4,000 years, and no one has ever dared to say that they want to be my master. Although you are very powerful, you can't make me surrender. The dragon said. Maybe the 4,000 years of difficulties have narrowed your vision. Your strength is nothing to me. George sneered. Although the dragon looks huge, and the scales on its body can also resist energy attacks. This can be seen from the shields in the hands of the villagers in the original timeline that can resist the attacks of Zhu Wenwu's men. However, George has too many ways to defeat the white dragon. But then, George chose the simplest and most direct method. So, when Yingbo and Yingnan walked to the river, they saw George, who was standing in the air just now, suddenly appeared in front of the guardian of their village, and then punched the dragon's jaw. Boom boom boom. In an instant, the whole dragon was knocked away by George, and huge waves were set off on the water. But then no matter how the white dragon fought back, it couldn't touch the corner of George's clothes at a speed like teleportation. Even the water ability used by the white dragon couldn't withstand George's punch. 3 minutes later, George saw that the white dragon had no new tricks, so he had no intention of fighting. He flashed to the opposite side of the white dragon, then pointed his hand at the white dragon, and silently said seal. He saw that the square composed of 6 golden light curtains imprisoned the white dragon inside. No matter how the white dragon rushed, it could not break the light curtain. It would be strange if it could break through. This trick was invented by George himself by adding the use of space ability to the original sealing array. It would be impossible to get out without the ability to break the void. Then, the huge golden hexagon slowly shrank in the surprised eyes of everyone in Taro village, including the dragon, which seemed to be shrinking in the same proportion. Until the cube became about 1 cubic meter and the huge white dragon became like a small white snake. George stopped. The fight between George and the white dragon naturally attracted the villagers of Taro village who had returned to their respective posts. So they found that it was George who immediately picked up his weapons again after fighting with their guardian and gathered by the river. Previously, because George moved too fast during the fight, they couldn't help, even if they wanted to, so they could only stand by the river and worry. Now that the fight has stopped, the guardian of their village is still the one being beaten. The villagers naturally want to help, so a large rain of arrows shot at George standing in the air. Although he has been fighting with the white dragon, everything that happened by the river cannot be hidden from George's mental power. George also admires the courage of the villagers to fight, even though they know they can't win, but that's all. With a wave of his hand, all the arrows were fixed in the air by George, and then flew back at a faster speed than when they came, deeply inserted into the ground, forming a circle to surround the villagers in the middle. This is a warning. If there is another reckless attack, George will give an appropriate counterattack. George waved his hand again to put the white dragon into the space, and then marked an area in the waters in the space to prevent it from running around. But George estimated that if he turned around, George would automatically throw it out of the space, and it didn't want to come out. You know, the energy in the chaotic space is even more concentrated than in this space, and it is more suitable for its growth and evolution. Ignoring the white dragon in the space, George looked at the huge portal across the river. George teleported in front of the seal, made of dragon scales, and gently stroked the scales that were emitting red light. A clear woman's cry for help came from behind the door. "Please, let me out." The woman's voice was very gentle, like Alice's voice and Lewin's voice. However, this simple mental erosion was useless to George. George stomped his feet lightly, and another huge seal rose from behind George, wrapping George inside. At this time, on the opposite side of the river, the villagers in Taro village were extremely anxious. A villager asked, "Yingbo, what should we do next?" As the village chief, Yingbo was naturally much calmer. He waved his hand to signal everyone to be quiet. After no one spoke, he said, "The only thing we can do now is to prepare for defense. All children should hide in the cellar. If we fail, we can escape to the outside world through the secret passage." Yingbo looked at the elderly people around him, then he pushed his cane hard and said, "Prepare for battle." Ha! All the villagers shouted in unison, "Fight together and die." Although George was aware of what was happening on the other side of the river, he didn't care. He looked at the huge gate and punched it with an ordinary punch. Boom. Please recommend and collect. Chapter 246, Devouring Law. Under George's punch, countless scales began to shake, and the dust accumulated on the scales began to fall with the shaking. In the gap between the scales, a small soul-eating beast as big as a vulture was struggling to get out. Seeing that it worked, George squatted slightly, pulled his right arm back, and then punched instantly. Boom. A strange cry came from behind the door. Then, where George's fist hit, a hole as high as a person appeared instantly, and the hole continued to grow as time went by. The moment the hole appeared, countless small soul-eating beasts drilled out of the hole and pounced on George. George supported himself with one hand, and a magic shield appeared in front of George to block the monster tide that rushed out like a torrent. Then, under George's control, countless gears appeared around the huge magic shield. With his hands apart, several shields with serrated teeth appeared again in the middle of the soul-eating beasts. As the shield rotated rapidly, the serrations became extremely sharp, and any small soul-eating beast would be reduced to ashes the moment it touched it. Another shrill cry. At this moment, the cave entrance was getting bigger and bigger, and George could see the scene inside clearly. Behind the dragon scale seal, there was a huge space, which was also filled with huge space energy. The cave stone wall that should have appeared was no longer visible. These soul-devouring beasts have been sealed in this cave for 4,000 years. It seems that this space energy is also related to it. Otherwise, with the intelligence of the soul-devouring beasts, it is impossible for them to find a way to escape from other places. George also saw a space crack in the deepest part of this space. The space energy there was a little disordered, but from time to time, one or two small soul-devouring beasts would drill out of it. That space crack should be the space passage for these soul-devouring beasts to come here from their original world. In front of this space crack, a huge monster was standing there. The 6 claws-like arms looked sharper, with a pair of flesh wings on the back, and 2 horns growing on the ferocious head. After seeing George walking into the cave, the monster showed its bloody mouth and let out a piercing roar. Several thick tails behind it instantly entangled towards George. George could feel a faint suction force from the nearby long tail, but that was all. In a flash, George appeared at the top of the cave. George's hands flashed with white light, and he pressed down, and an iron cannon flew out instantly. Under George's control, all the small soul-eating beasts in the cave were cleared out in just a moment. The soul-eating king was also very frightened when he saw this, and his pair of flesh wings kept flapping, and then he flew up. The seemingly huge body became very flexible at this time, and the huge claws grabbed George. George took a step back, and then in an instant a mechanical creation over 70 meters high appeared in the cave. George did not use any weapons, but just punched the soul-eating monster on the head with all his strength, and purple blood spit out from the monster's bloody mouth, and the huge monster fell on its back again. After landing, the free mecha stepped on the monster's thigh, making it struggle constantly. The soul-devouring beast immediately wrapped its tail around the legs of the mecha, and the other 5 claws also grabbed the arms of the mecha. The mecha controlled by George did not move, allowing the beast to trap him. The beast opened its mouth wide, and a huge suction force came out of the beast's mouth. Even George inside the mecha could feel a huge suction force that could shake his soul, as if it could suck his soul out of his body in the next moment. At this time, George was not only not nervous, but also showed a happy smile that some conspiracy had succeeded. Then in the next moment, the huge mecha and the soul-devouring beast wrapped around it disappeared into the cave. Only a small soul-devouring beast that had just drilled out of the space crack was left, making a helpless cry. In the chaotic space, George, who had recovered his body, looked at the soul-devouring beast that was fixed in the air, as if time had stopped, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth unconsciously. When thinking of this soul-devouring beast, George was wondering whether it had the ability to devour. That's why he deliberately left a floor just now, allowing the beast to trap him and give it a chance to activate its skills. After experiencing the Soul Devourer's talent in person, George was sure that this Soul Devourer had what he wanted. Although this giant beast can only strengthen itself by devouring souls, it also has a bit of the devouring ability of the devouring law. Isn't George's ordinary travel through the movie world just to collect those laws? George always remembered that, if he wanted to truly upgrade his chaotic space, he would always lack the laws, and the skills and technologies he collected were just the byproducts of traveling or trading. Just like the chakra in the Naruto world, without the support of the laws, people in the Marvel world would not be able to learn it, even if they were taught. And the devouring law is not so easy to obtain even in other movie worlds. At least George has not met one yet. There is one in the Marvel world, the only person who survived the world before the last Big Bang, known as Planet Devourer or Planet Destroyer. That is the first person in the Marvel world who has mastered the devouring law. But when there are other options, George does not want to take the initiative to provoke the existence of the 5 great creators. And George only needs a lost seed, and now this magic beast is just right. After George put the magic beast into the space, he could also feel a slight throbbing from the space, proving that his guess was correct. George directly sent the magic beast into the chaotic energy group at the top of the space, and a series of shrill cries sounded in the sky. George could see that a trace of mist was extracted from the body of the soul-devouring magic beast, and condensed into a purple round bead on the head of the soul-devouring magic beast. When the last trace of purple mist was extracted, the soul-devouring magic beast was completely annihilated, without even a trace of ash left. The round bead condensed by the purple mist was also wrapped in chaotic energy again. As the master of this space, George could feel that the entire space would begin to evolve again. However, this process may be very slow, so it is impossible for George to gain any new abilities for a while. George flashed and appeared on a large lake. With a wave of his hand, the white dragon with a bulging belly was taken out. As for whether the water system law can be extracted from the white dragon, George has no hope. Because the so-called person with the heart of the dragon can only master the use of ki, and it can be seen that the fundamental ability it masters is not the water system law. Rather than wasting a rare dragon, it is better to subdue it and use it as a mount. Then the next second, a man and a dragon appeared in the cave. However, at this moment, two soul-devouring beasts appeared in the cave, and they were stubbornly hitting the band set by George. Please recommend and collect. Chapter 247 News from the Eastern Immortal Court. With a wave of his hand, George beat the two soul-devouring beasts into ashes, then turned around and sent a voice message to Bailong. Wait here for a moment, I will deal with this space crack. After saying that, George did not wait for Bailong to answer. A pair of gorgeous gloves appeared on George's right hand, and then George took out the cosmic cube again. Although the fundamental power of the cosmic cube cannot be fully exerted after using the chaotic energy for several years, it is still no problem to make some small adjustments. Then, with George's control, the space energy diffused in this cave began to converge towards the cosmic cube in George's hand until the cave revealed its original appearance. Then George controlled the gathered space energy to start repairing the space crack. This method was learned in the library of Kamatage. Soon this space crack was filled, and George set up a huge isolation array on this space. The rest is to wait for the space to heal itself. I believe it will take only about 10 days at most to make up for it completely. Of course, unless someone knows this weak point in space. Then he used huge energy to penetrate the magic circle left by George and break the void. Otherwise he would not have to worry about the appearance of the Soul Devourer beast in the future. After solving this problem, George put away the space gem and gloves again. He came to the opposite side of the white dragon and said, now this space is safe, and the villagers of Taro village can also unload the burden of thousands of years, and no longer have to worry about being threatened by the Soul Devourer beast. Thank you, human, said the white dragon. What about you? Have you figured it out? Are you willing to submit to me? George looked at the white dragon and said. The white dragon lowered his head and thought for a while before saying, if I'm willing to submit to you, will you let my blood flow? Why do you ask this? George asked curiously. Because a long time ago, the elders in our tribe were often caught by the immortals to let their blood flow to make elixirs. The white dragon said with lingering fear. Oh, there really is an Eastern fairy court? George asked. Yes, but it is said that an immortal has found a way to transcend, so he took away the entire Eastern fairy court. The white dragon said disappointedly. Then why didn't you leave with them? George asked curiously. I was originally just a dragon with a thin bloodline. I was afraid of being killed when I saw the dragon's nest. I also saw my senior being drained of blood and his liver dug out, so I hid in fear. Who knew that, when I woke up, I had lost the trace of the Eastern Fairy Court? Bailong did not hide this point and answered directly. Then you are really miserable, but how did you get to the Taro space? George asked. Because this Taro space was originally the passage between the Eastern Fairy Court and the outside world, but after the Eastern Fairy Court disappeared, it became a separate space. Bailong replied. Then do you still know the location of the space door at that time? George asked. If the original space door is still there, Bailong can't open it, but it doesn't mean that George can't open it either. If he can get the information that the Eastern Fairy Court left that year, maybe George can follow it. Even if he can't find the way to transcend, it's good to get some Eastern practice methods. Unfortunately, Bailong's next words broke George's fantasy. Bailong had already searched every corner of this space, but he didn't find any traces at all. How did the Soul Devourer here appear? George asked in confusion. I don't know. It's possible that the immortals broke another empty space when they cut off the connection with this small world, so it appeared. Bailong also expressed his guess. Then didn't you go in to explore? George asked. I have explored it. Thousands of years ago, the energy between heaven and earth was still abundant. Although I couldn't completely eliminate those soul devourers at that time, they couldn't do anything to me, so I went in to explore. There was only darkness in that space, and there were only countless soul devourers. There was no harvest. But for thousands of years, my strength has been declining. Now I should no longer be the opponent of the soul devourer. After all, it only needs souls to recover quickly. Baelong said here, looking at George with some awe. Although it didn't see how George killed the soul devourer, this empty cave can already say something. Well, I promise you, I won't bleed you, or use you to make bills. You don't have to worry about that. I'm just looking for a mount for myself. George assured Baelong. In fact, it was useless for George to make pills. He didn't have the skills. Then I'm willing to submit to you, my master. Baelong landed on the ground and lowered her head. George stretched out his hand and carved a mark on Baelong's spiritual sea of consciousness. From then on, her life and death would be controlled by George. I'll give you a name. From now on, you will be called Tingzin. George patted Tingzin's dragon head and said, "Thank you for the name, master." Tingzin said happily. George stood on Tingzin's head and looked around the empty mountain belly again. He transmitted a voice to Tingzin and said, "Okay, let's go." Ang. A high-pitched dragon roar came out, and Tingzin kicked his forelegs and flew out of the cave. Tingzin soared up, circled in the clouds, and then fell straight down. At the moment of entering the water, the dragon head raised and flew close to the water surface. After circling around the shore of Taro village, it returned to the shore. George stood on Tingzin's head, looked at the villagers on the shore who were confused, then smiled and said, "Everyone, I told you, when I came here, that I have no ill intentions. Of course, there were some misunderstandings, but now they have been resolved. What I want to tell you now is that the Soul Devourer has been destroyed by me. You don't have to worry about being attacked by the Soul Devourer in the future. You are safe." Although they saw their guardian appear with a man in front of them, the villagers still couldn't easily believe George's words. So after a commotion, they all looked at the old man Yingbo in the front. With the help of Yingnan, Yingbo took 2 steps forward, then knelt in front of Baelong and said, "Respected guardian, is what he said true? Have we really gotten rid of the threat of the Dark Beast?" When the other villagers saw the village chief kneeling down, they also put down their weapons and knelt on one knee in front of Tingzin. Tingzin has protected them for more than 4,000 years, which is enough to withstand their kneeling. So after hearing Yingbo's inquiry, the huge dragon head nodded up and down, as if answering Yingbo's words. George knew that, if these people didn't see it with their own eyes, they would naturally not believe his words so easily. So under George's voice transmission, a water bridge directly to the other side of the river appeared under their feet. Please collect. Please recommend. Chapter 248. The idea of building a dinosaur park. The villagers of Taro village were of course willing to go and investigate in person. As for whether it was a trap, no one would doubt it. The main reason was that the gap in strength between the two sides was too big, so there was no need for it. So under the leadership of Yingbo, all the villagers on the shore went to the cave where the Soul Devourer was originally sealed, wanting to see with their own eyes the place that had worried them for thousands of years. Soon after, even though there was a big river between them, George could hear the excited shouts coming from the cave on the other side of the river. A few days later, Zhu Wenwu and Yingli had returned to Taro village. And after discussion by the villagers, the two of them could continue to live in this village in the future. And Yingbo also wanted to pass the position of village chief to Zhu Wenwu. After all, he was indeed old, and Zhu Wenwu's knowledge was higher than his. The key is that Zhu Wenwu and George have a closer relationship. Now the guardians of the entire Taro have become each other's mounts. How can they not have a good relationship? George also brought Alice and Shaolin over and attended the wedding of Zhu Wenwu and his wife in the village. A lively and warm wedding with the blessing of the elders is what countless new Liwats dream of, so Yingli is undoubtedly the happiest person here. At the banquet, the new Liwats frequently toasted George, thanking him for everything he had done for them, and George also drank until the glass was dry. George not only fulfilled their wishes, but also gave them a gift on the wedding day, 10 rings made by George himself with Amazon metal. These 10 rings not only have the functions of Zhu Wenwu's 10 rings, but can also be enlarged and reduced to trap people and defend. With these 10 rings, they don't have to worry about the problem of growing old together. The scenery here is so beautiful, and there are all kinds of cute or domineering beasts, which make Alice and Xiaolei linger. Xiaolei was even more incredible when she saw these beasts, because as a Chinese, Xiaolei has an inexplicable feeling for these beasts. On this day, George took the 2 girls to travel around this space on Tinkson's head. The fire phoenix accompanied them in the sky, the white deer jumped in the forest, and the 2 girls shouted happily. Although there are many exotic beasts from the east here, George thought that maybe he should go to that world to bring back some magical creatures from western legends. There are many fire dragons, unicorns, etc. There are also many of them. Thinking of the Cretaceous dinosaurs scattered on the number 2 satellite of the ancient star, an idea suddenly appeared in George's mind. "Dear, how about we build a zoo?" George said to the 2 beauties who were playing water. "Joe, do you want to open a magical zoo? These mythical creatures will definitely be very popular." Alice said. "Yes, but are you sure these creatures won't cause you trouble?" Xiaolei immediately thought of the blazing flames of the fire phoenix and said, "Of course not these magical beasts. I want to build a Cretaceous dinosaur park. What do you think?" George asked. "This idea is not bad, and it won't cause you any trouble," Xiaolei said. "But how to explain where those dinosaurs came from?" Alice asked. "This is very simple. We will say that the dinosaur DNA was extracted from the stomach of mosquito sealed in amber, and then cloned the dinosaur after laboratory cultivation. These technologies are not difficult to solve in modern times," George explained. "You still have a lot of ideas," Xiaolei said while holding George's hand. Alice also smiled and looked at George. "Well, this matter will be handed over to you. I will let Jia and Wiki cooperate with you," George said with a smile. "Why?" the 2 women asked in confusion. "I'm going to find something for you to do. I have found a place for you. It's on the island above the underwater kingdom." George used the watch on his wrist to project the map of the island and then said, "This island has been bought for a long time and has been vacant. It is just right to develop Dinosaur Island." The 2 women looked at each other and said, "No problem." Alice was originally a royal princess, so she was naturally cunning and resourceful. Xiaolei had even managed large enterprises. So George was naturally very relieved to let them handle this matter. The reason, as George told the 2 girls directly, was just to find something for them to do. They were not the canaries that George raised, and it was not a good thing to trap them on Hogwarts Island. It was okay that Alice was a bit of a homebody and obsessed with magic, and Xiaolei was originally a strong woman. The reason why they were not allowed to do things earlier was for their safety. Now their own strength is already very good, and George can be completely relieved after designing the gifts for them. Happy time always makes people feel particularly short. George took the 2 girls to play in the tarot space for a month, and then received a message from the real clone that there were new discoveries in the space and they needed to go back. However, during this month, George had collected a lot of oriental mythological creatures in the wild and entered the chaotic space. He also found an area in the chaotic space that was very similar to this environment for them to settle down. After Tinkson was taken into the space by George, he was also placed in a lake next to it to help George manage these strange beasts. As for whether George's taking Tinkson away would affect Taro's awakening of the heart of the dragon in the future, George was not worried. This awakening has been engraved into the blood. As long as the body contains the blood of Taro village, there is a chance to feel the existence of Ki. Of course, there are also some effects. That is, it will no longer be possible to forge weapons with those dragon scales. But now that the Soul Devourer has been destroyed, even if there is no dragon scale, it will not affect them. After saying goodbye to Zhu Wenwu, Yingli, Yingbo and others, George went directly back to Hogwarts Island through the portal. Although George needed to deal with the news from the clone, he was not in a hurry. The other party has not entered the jump point yet, and there is artificial intelligence monitoring, so it doesn't matter if it is 1 or 2 hours late. After returning to Hogwarts Island, George was ready to contact Jia. Red Queen. George sat in the study and shouted to the air. "Master, I'm here." The voice of Red Queen sounded. "Help me pick up Gyring," George ordered. Red Queen is the earliest artificial intelligence obtained. After being upgraded by George, it is now responsible for all business related to the company on Earth. Under its monitoring, the company will not make mistakes in many aspects such as finance and personnel background checks. And once any spy appears, it will be discovered immediately. Please recommend and collect. Chapter 249 Mr. Hyde. Don't think that with George's current status and the size of his company, no one dares to continue to send spies to George's company. On the contrary, there are not only some, but also many. Even some official organizations in the United States have arranged people in George's company, and it is even more common to bribe the senior executives of George's company halfway. Of course, there are many Hydra and SHIELD among them. In the early days, George would use very tough means to tell some people to take back their claws, that is to prevent himself from being divided up on the road to growth. Now, George will deliberately leave some spies under his nose. It is to tell some sensitive people that he is safe because he has grown to a point that makes them feel scared. Of course, what he shows them is only what he wants them to see. Those who don't want them to see, they can't find anything, no matter how many people they send. However, everything has a bottom line. Those who want to deliberately make something happen and want to frame George and the company have not been absent in recent years, but they were dragged by George to feed the dinosaurs before they made any trouble. The video was quickly connected, and Gyring's figure was projected on the open space in the middle of the study. "Boss, it's rare for you to call me. Just tell me if you have anything to ask," Gyring said. "No big deal. I'm going to let Alice and Lewin build a Cretaceous dinosaur park in the Yucatan Peninsula. Please cooperate with me when the time comes," George said. "Of course, no problem, but boss, I want to take a leave after this busy period," Gyring asked. "Of course, no problem, but can you tell me what it is?" George asked curiously. You know, since George brought Gyring back and trained her as the general manager of the company for decades, Gyring has never told him about taking a leave. "I'm going to get married and go on a honeymoon, by the way," Gyring replied. "Oh, lifelong events are naturally no problem. I can bring that lucky guy back for dinner later," George said. "Thank you, boss." Gyring bowed to thank him. Although George and Gyring are superiors and subordinates, they have been getting along for decades and have become like family members. Now that Gyring has her own life and is about to form a new family, George will naturally be happy for her. "Does the man know your identity as an Inhuman?" George asked again. "I've already told him, but he doesn't mind," Gyring said with a smile. "By the way, I don't know his name yet," George asked curiously. "Zab, Calvin Zab. He is a project leader in the company's laboratory," Gyring introduced. "Since the other party can accept your identity, that's good. In the future, he will get a copy of the Permanent Youth Potion every year," George promised. The Permanent Youth Agent is a product developed by the Infinite Formula. As long as it is taken on time, Zab can have a long life. Needless to say, the preciousness of this thing is naturally beyond words. Now, except for Carter and a few old people living on Hogwarts Island, no one in the outside world has taken this potion. "Thank you, boss." Gyring bowed again, because George solved her biggest worry. Although Gyring knew the existence of the potion, she couldn't decide who to use it for after George asked. As for George, he obviously had more ways to prolong life, and he could give Yingli a set of 10 rings. Why did he only give this potion to Gyring's fiancée? Of course, George had his own ideas. George still knew about Mr. Calvin Zab. Born in Trenton, New Jersey, he is a talented medical biological research scientist and is good at studying the effects of hormones on human physiological functions. In the original timeline, after Gyring was abducted by Hydra for experiments, he sacrificed the lives of a villager to save Gyring again. In order to find Sky, who was taken away by SHIELD, and to avenge Hydra, he used his knowledge to invent a Hyde potion. It allows him to have short-term super strength and physical fitness, but this potion has a big flaw, which will make his consciousness confused. In the end, he killed Gyring for his daughter Sky. Of course, with George's intervention in this life, his fate will also be changed. In fact, Calvin Zabo has always liked gyring sincerely, but George will not give him such an important thing directly. Because as a scientist, there is always a talent for death. So George is not at ease to hand over that kind of alchemical products to them. No need to thank me, this is what you deserve. I believe you will handle it well. George said with a smile. Okay, I have other things to do. Let Lewin contact you later. Okay, boss. Gyring replied. After George turned off the communication, he returned to the greenhouse, told the two women, and then teleported to the lunar base. Boss, you're looking for me? Bucky appeared in front of George in a racing suit. Are you going to participate in the competition? George asked curiously. No, I'm teaching Natasha how to drive various vehicles. Bucky replied with a smile. Well, let Natasha rest for 2 days first, and go to recruit all the soldiers. There may be guests this time. George explained. Yes, I'll arrange it right away. Bucky put away his smile and answered seriously. After Bucky left the command room, George called up the photo of the spacecraft sent back by the monitoring facilities outside the jump point again. It was a small flagship shaped like a whale, and about 300 meters long. Judging from the weapon system exposed on the entire spacecraft, the force was not strong. However, there was no obvious mark on the entire spacecraft, and it was unclear which force it belonged to, but according to the time, George could roughly guess which force came to Earth. After leaving the lunar base, George appeared again on the cruiser of the Kree Empire that was already in the invisible state of Marvel's laboratory. George left a secret door on the control system of this spaceship at the earliest time. This one even activated the electronic control ability, making himself the highest controller in this cruise ship. However, this authority is hidden, and will not be discovered by others. George mainly wants to be able to check the monitoring of the entire flagship, and locate the spacecraft at any time. George will not interfere with other things. After walking around, and finding that there was not much difference from a few years ago, George was ready to leave. When taking it away, George remembered that he seemed to have forgotten something. Thinking back, George remembered the pet that Maul had once raised. Please recommend and collect. Chapter 250 Newbie on the Road. Maul's pet looks like an ordinary orange cat, but it is actually a cosmic creature, the Meat Eater. The Meat Eater is one of the most terrifying creatures in the universe. It can devour almost everything. Its stomach is connected to a cosmic space, and can devour space. It has an energy bag in its body. When in danger, it can release crazy tentacles and jagged teeth to attack the enemy. George teleported to the joint military base of the United States Aviation Administration, where all parties had cooperated before. George, who was invisible outside the base, instantly scanned the entire base with his mental power, and then teleported directly to an office on the 4th floor. The moment George appeared, George discovered the existence of the orange cat on the sofa next to him, and the orange cat stood up the moment George appeared. Meow. The orange cat was not afraid of George, but walked towards George gracefully, constantly rubbing its body around George's feet. George knew that this was an ordinary cat's gesture of showing goodwill. Maybe the Meat Eater also did this, who knows. So George bent down and gently stroked the orange cat's head, and the orange cat made a series of purring sounds. There was a collar hanging around the orange cat's neck, on which was engraved the orange cat's name, Goo Goo. George took out a big fish from the space, which was nearly 1 meter long. The devourer beast Goo Goo first turned around, and licked George's hand with his tongue, and then meowed at George. George knew without using his mental power, that Goo Goo was asking him for food. George rubbed Goo Goo's head and said, "Eat it." Through feeding the strange beasts in the Taro space some time ago, George knew that these creatures liked this kind of food rich in energy. Then he saw Goo Goo open his mouth towards the big fish, and several tentacles suddenly stretched out, and then the big fish more than 1 meter long disappeared directly in front of George. Goo Goo stretched out his tongue, and licked around his mouth, and then rubbed George with his body. George picked up Goo Goo, rubbed him, and said to Goo Goo, "Goo Goo, do you want to go with me?" Although the devourer beast is also terrifying, after it has fully grown, it is actually just like that, at least for George. If you are willing to go back with George, it would be nice to keep a pet. At least Goo Goo's appearance is still very cute. Goo Goo licked George with his tongue, and then gently rubbed George's hand with his head. Okay, since you are willing, then you can follow me from now on. George rubbed Gugu's head. Then he pointed his finger and left a little mark in Gugu's sea of consciousness. It's not that George is too cautious, but mainly because there are too many magical abilities in this world, and George doesn't want to reveal his secrets because of any negligence. And with this mark, Gugu can better understand George's meaning. As for whether George will affect the subsequent plot after taking Gugu away, or whether he will accidentally kill Heiludan, it's none of George's business. George is just looking for some fun, not anyone's babysitter. George moved his feet and appeared in space. Just when George was petting the cat, the spaceship had entered the solar system through the jump point. And it also stopped in the far orbit of the Earth very quickly. George petted the cat and then cast his eyes on the spaceship. In the command room in front, George saw the familiar green skin. This was indeed a Skrull spaceship. Continuing the search, George saw a large room in the front half of the spaceship and saw Carol Danvers hanging upside down. Well, it seems that everything is still in the beginning stage, and Danvers has not escaped from the Skrull's captivity. After continuing to scan the entire spaceship, George also put a magic mark on the Skrulls on this spaceship, just like the Skrulls in the laboratory spaceship. In this way, no matter where these Skrulls run to, George can always know their location, as long as he wants. Returning to SHIELD and sitting in the office, George first put Gugu on the table and then began to sort out the documents that the clone had scattered on the desk before. This is an application for the establishment of the SHIELD Academy. George already knows the content through the memory of the clone. This SHIELD Academy, which is known as the training base of Hydra, was finally proposed by Pierce. But from a certain perspective, George had no reason not to support it, not to mention that the other directors had already agreed, so George also signed his name readily. George pressed a button on the desk, ready to ask his assistant to take the document to Pierce. The door of the office opened, and George did not expect that it would be Pierce himself who came in. "Minister." Pierce greeted respectfully. "Pierce, I was just looking for you. Your application has been approved by the board of directors. Here is the document. Take it with you when you leave later." George pushed the signed document over. "Thank you, Minister." Pierce thanked him. "It's just official business." George stood up, walked to the wine cabinet, and picked up a bottle of wine at random, opened it and poured 2 glasses. He motioned Pierce to come to the reception area opposite, handed Pierce a glass, and sat down before asking, "Pierce, is there anything you want to do this time? I don't believe you came here just for this document." The minister is still wise. "It's like this. There are a number of promotion quotas this time. Do you think Phil Coulson will be included in this list?" Pierce said. "That's right. 3 years ago, the good old Phil Coulson became George's new assistant. Of course, he replaced another person." Sometimes George thought about it, and it was interesting. Since Pierce, several directors of S.H.I.E.L.D. had served as George's assistants. Now Coulson is not only young, but also has a full head of hair. It is hard to imagine what Coulson has experienced under the hands of Black Egg. However, since Coulson just meets the upgrade standard, George will not deliberately suppress him. Moreover, in the original timeline, Coulson seems to have started to follow Fury to carry out missions at this time. Of course, no problem. Coulson's performance has always been good. He is sincere and honest. He is a good seedling. You have to find a reliable person to guide him well, George said with a smile. Of course. Pierce answered readily. 10 minutes later, Pierce left George's office with Black Egg and Coulson. Just when George asked Pierce to find a good teacher for Coulson, Pierce called Black Egg directly. Then he gave a face-to-face lecture in front of George, and Coulson was naturally moved again. George understood that Pierce was doing it for him to see, but it didn't matter. It was interesting to watch Pierce act. However, it can be seen that Pierce does value black marinated eggs. Please recommend. Please collect. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.